Chapter 424. Behemoth didn't notice the attack at all. Even if he could see the Hanjin's movements, it would be useless. In the face of thousands of identical figures, he couldn't tell which one was real, which one was fake, which one could cause fatal damage, and which one was just a decoy. The only thing he could do was to wave his arms desperately and blast the Hanjin away as much as possible. A ball of white flame lit up in Hanjin's hand. He then waved his right hand, and the flame hung on the back of the behemoth's neck, quietly burning. Then Hanjin used the ground shrinking spell again, and appeared behind another behemoth. Experience told him that to deal with this kind of monster with such weak magic resistance, he only needed to use the Samadhi fire. The two behemoths seemed to be competing with each other, and each howled louder than the last. The behemoth that was attacked first used his palm to wipe his eyes, but the Samadhi fire stuck to his eyelids and burned his eyeballs into liquid in an extremely short amount of time. It even spread to the depths of his eye sockets, which caused the most direct pain and also the most direct terror. The behemoth was in so much pain that he ran around like a headless fly. If he collided with another behemoth, his brothers would suffer with him. As long as a little bit of the Samadhi fire stuck to them, they wouldn't be able to get rid of it. Fortunately, his howls never stopped. Although the other behemoths couldn't see what was happening, they could hear his howls. They knew that something was wrong, so before the collision happened, they had already dodged to the side. At the front, Dominique was fighting bravely, but the behemoth she was fighting with was getting more and more injured. His movements were also getting slower and slower. In reality, the injuries didn't affect him much, but after being hit by more than 10 lightning bolts, his brain was severely damaged, and his body's reactions were also becoming sluggish. Finally, Dominique found an opening and stabbed her giant sword into the behemoth's chest. To a normal person, Dominique's giant sword was frighteningly large. It could easily pierce through a few people, but compared to a behemoth, it was still a little short and thin. Dominique's hand had already touched the fur on the behemoth's chest, and the giant sword sank deep into it. However, it couldn't penetrate the behemoth's body. The behemoth roared and waved his right hand. This time, he gave up on attacking Dominique and only reached out to grab her right arm. At the same time, the behemoth that was fighting with Guevara suddenly broke away from the battle and rushed towards Dominique, swinging his fist at her body. Dominique was shocked and struggled with all her might, but her entire right forearm was firmly trapped by the behemoth's fingers. Dominique raised her legs and kicked at the behemoth's chest, but the result was the same. She couldn't move an inch. At the same time, Dominique felt a mysterious force pulling at her body. She knew that Hanjin was helping her. Unfortunately, Hanjin's magic didn't have any effect. Dominique's heart couldn't help but turn cold when she saw the giant fist getting closer and closer. The behemoths were known as the kings of the land. Their strength was enough to destroy iron walls. No race could compete with a behemoth face to face. Be it dragons, titans, or even humans, if they wanted to defeat a behemoth, they could only choose to avoid it. If they were hit by this fist, the consequences would be unimaginable. Bastard! Guevara's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. He leaped into the air, and the dragon spear in his hand glowed brightly. Then, he threw the dragon spear with all his might, aiming for the back of the behemoth's head. As the saying went, don't hit someone in the face. This behemoth was Guevara's opponent. If the two behemoths worked together to severely injure Dominique, then Guevara could only blame himself for not being able to contain the behemoths. For an old general who was willing to spend all his energy to help the younger generation, he could not accept such an outcome no matter what. At this moment, a figure jumped out of the void. She waved the magic wand in her hand forward. 2 electric arcs shot up from the behemoth's feet and quickly swept across its body. Then, she pointed the magic wand at Dominique. A layer of light appeared out of nowhere and enveloped Dominique. Then, the magic wand shot out another ray of light. A layer of fog that reflected cold light condensed on Dominique's body. It was the frost armor spell. Yelena's reaction was correct and timely. She attacked the behemoth with electric arcs. She wanted to use the paralysis effect of the electric arcs to restrain the behemoth's attack, and then use the magic shield to protect Dominique. As for the frost armor spell, it was a double-edged spell. Except for certain creatures and water mages, the frost armor spell would greatly restrict their movements. However, Yelena didn't care. She wanted to save Dominique's life. The defensive ability of the air element's shield of air was far inferior to the frost armor spell. The god of fate didn't favor Dominique, at least not today. The electric arcs had a very high chance of paralysis, especially for behemoths with weak magic resistance. There should be at least a 30% chance. However, nothing happened when the two electric arcs swept across the behemoth's body. In the next moment, the behemoth's giant fist had already hit Dominique. Yelena seemed to have only released one magic shield, but two of them had been destroyed. In this moment of life and death, Yelena went beyond her usual level. She used the magic shield, frost armor, and electric arcs that she had just learned. In the blink of an eye, she had released 3 overlapping spells. Even if Jedis were here, he would be stunned. Boom! Countless ice shards exploded from Dominique's body, followed by the crisp sound of bones breaking. Although she was protected by the double layer of magic shield and double layer of frost armor, the behemoth's fist was too terrifying. Dominique spat out a mouthful of blood, and her body was violently shaken. Her right arm was still tightly held by the behemoth, and as a result, her arm was immediately broken. Guevara's dragon spear shot out and penetrated the back of the behemoth's head at the same time as the behemoth's fist hit Dominique. Guevara had used all his strength, and the 2-meter-long dragon spear actually penetrated the back of the behemoth's head and blew up a bowl-sized bloody hole. If it had been anywhere else, this would have been a minor injury, but with a bloody hole in the head, even the behemoth couldn't withstand it. He swayed and fell down. Guevara had been looking for a sure-kill opportunity, and now he had finally found it. However, it was in exchange for Dominique's heavy injury. However, there was still another behemoth. His left hand was still tightly holding on to Dominique's broken right arm, and he swung his right fist at Dominique. Dominique endured the excruciating pain and stomped on the behemoth's stomach with the tip of her foot. She flipped over, and her broken right arm gave her some freedom. However, as she jumped up, the broken bone actually pierced through her elbow. Anyone else would have fainted from the pain. However, the silver light in Dominique's eyes was getting brighter and brighter. She raised her left hand, and a bright flash of lightning flashed. Then, a spear made of lightning appeared in her hand. She stabbed the spear with all her strength, aiming for the behemoth's heart. In a battle between strong masters, the most important thing was to stay calm. Unfortunately, at this moment, being calm was such a luxury. If the behemoth could stay calm, he would definitely find a way to avoid Dominique's attack. If Dominique could stay calm, she would never use such an extreme method to launch a counterattack. According to the speed of both sides, if the behemoth could hit Dominique, Dominique could also stab her spear into the behemoth's heart, and they would both die together. Yelena screamed and waved her magic staff. While she was casting spells, she was making random wishes to various gods and desperately calling Han Jin's name. 2 arcs of lightning appeared under the behemoth's feet. Overlapping magic. Overlapping magic didn't necessarily mean that 2 different types of magic were fused together. The same magic could also be overlapped. This was Yelena's own understanding. Suddenly, the behemoth's movements stiffened. Dominique's spear had already pierced the behemoth's chest. She had used so much force that she almost wanted to stab her hand into the behemoth's body. Thank God. Yelena felt like crying with joy. She waved her magic staff again and released lightning. The lightning flashed and hit the behemoth's forehead. The lightning released by Yelena was a little redundant, and the javelin had completely pierced through the behemoth's heart. The red light in the behemoth's eyes quickly dimmed, and its body slowly fell forward. The behemoth's willpower made one's scalp tingle. He didn't let go of Dominique even when he died. As a result, Dominique was pressed down by a body that weighed tens of thousands of pounds. Her broken right arm was pressed down at a different angle. Dominique finally couldn't help but let out a muffled cry of pain. Guevara grabbed the handle of the dragon spear and pulled it out by force. He then rushed to the body in front of him. He wanted to save Dominique. Charge! More than 200 mountain giants and countless Gale Wolf warriors rushed forward like a tide. The clusters of waving scimitars formed a forest of steel. Guevara's footsteps paused. He was hesitant. Should he save Dominique or stop the enemy? "Leave it to me," Yelena screamed. She then raised the magic staff in her hand high. In fact, her magic power hadn't recovered yet. The most important thing to do was to return to Han Jin's magic laboratory and meditate. However, she was like Han Jin. She had no other choice. Han Jin, Gao Bin, and Sunir had to deal with more than 10 behemoth warriors. Major Domo Gale and the others weren't suitable for this kind of chaotic battle. Kane had to support the other legions. Whether or not the alliance could be broken through by the behemoth army depended on her alone. Fire! Hogan, who was on the God of War, roared. Flashing elemental bullets pierced through the sky and landed in the middle of the behemoth army's formation, exploding into balls of fire. Hogan had already replaced all the magic crystal cannons with fire magic crystals. In the past, he was very frugal and tried not to waste magic crystals. Now that he was no longer calm, what was there to be frugal about? Fire. Fire with all your might. Boom, 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 boom. Hundreds of magic crystal cannons kept roaring. When the magic crystals were almost used up, the magicians would immediately replace them with new ones. As the cannon captain on the God of War, Hogan had spent a lot of effort in this area. Whether it was controlling the magic crystal cannons, adjusting the angle of the magic crystal cannons, or replacing the magic crystals, the magician's movements were very smooth and tight. Sweat more in normal times, blood less in wartime. This was a training slogan from another world. Although Hogan hadn't heard of it before, he was still from the regular army of Cold Shadow City, so he knew what he had to pay attention to. The high-end strength of the behemoth army had already infiltrated the rear and center of the Alliance army. The rest were ordinary behemoths. The Gale Wolf warriors were called elites, but that was only in comparison. With their strength, they couldn't protect themselves from the explosion of the elemental bullets. Every explosion could easily blow up a large number of behemoths. In the name of the Thunder God, Yelena's chanting was still very clear in the roar of the magic crystal cannons. Roar! The magic staff that was raised high emitted a dazzling light, and only those with the best eyesight would be able to see that there were cracks on the huge magical crystal. Countless bolts of lightning poured down from the sky, tearing the space apart. It was impossible to count how many bolts of lightning were hidden inside. Within a radius of 1,000 meters, the Gale Wolf warriors who were charging like a tsunami and waving their scimitars all fell down at the same time. They didn't even have time to scream. It was very simple. Blood splattered in the air like a pool of water that emitted a strange red light. Then, it fell down neatly, or rather, it was slapped down onto the ground. There was no suspense at all. It was a one-hit kill. The mountain giants were also blown up, but their resistance was much stronger than the behemoths. Some couldn't get up no matter how hard they tried, while others struggled to get up and continued to charge forward. Their bodies had been torn by the lightning, and they were almost covered in blood. However, just as the surviving mountain giants ran a few steps, Yelena raised her magic staff again. In the name of the Thunder God, the mountain giants couldn't help but show despair in their eyes. How is this possible? Although the power of Lightning Storm was ranked second among the advanced lightning spells, inferior to Thunder Explosion and stronger than 9-Grid Thunder Call, it covered a very wide area, so its consumption of magic power exceeded that of Thunder Explosion. Even a Grand Magus couldn't cast Lightning Storm continuously. Unfortunately, doubting the enemy could not change history. Countless lightning bolts poured down from the sky like a spider web made of thousands of lightning bolts stacked together. The space was torn into pieces again, and the hill giants were instantly knocked down before they could do anything. There were many warriors and mages gathered around each lord, and this was the reason why mages had a higher status than warriors. If it had been Guevara, it would have taken him a long time to kill all of the hill giants, but to Yelena, she had only raised her magic wand twice. Of course, only she knew what she had sacrificed for this. If she had the belief that she would rather sacrifice herself than take a step back, No one could ignore her power. The two lightning storms had created a no-man's land in front of Yelena with a radius of 1,000 meters. The orcs behind continued to rush up and fill the gap. Yelena proudly held her magic staff and stood there motionlessly, as if she was waiting for the next battle. Harley was controlling the god of war to descend bit by bit. He thought that Yelena and Guevara would not be able to stop so many orcs. At the most critical moment, he would land the god of war on the ground and use the huge hull of the god of war to forcefully block the orcs' charge. Seeing this, he was very surprised. Side spin. Side spin. Hogan screamed. The middle was safe for now, so he had to go support the other legions. The Knight Regiment of the Holy Crown City was almost completely annihilated, and the other legions were also in a bad situation, constantly retreating. However, the madness of the orcs could not last long. Tens of thousands of elven archers were desperately shooting arrows under the protection of the warriors. It could be said that with every step the orcs took, thousands of corpses would be left behind. When the elite Gale-Wolf warriors were exhausted, what would the orcs have left? It was with this belief that everyone gritted their teeth and held on. We are miserable, but you are more miserable. We have more casualties, but you have more casualties. In the previous wars, Han Jin had always tried his best to protect every soldier. He would rather take risks than let the lives of his soldiers be threatened, especially Riptide. They had always been spoiled, but now Han Jin was unable to protect them. If they wanted to live, they could only rely on themselves. Riptide's performance did not disappoint. When the knights saw Lang Ning, who was not very powerful, take the lead in breaking into the enemy's formation, all the night went crazy. Although this was a legion that lacked actual combat experience, their fearlessness and bravery were not inferior to the Mountain Legion. Boom! The Han Jin who were knocked away turned into little stars. This time, they did not reform. Even the figures of the Han Jin in front of them gradually faded away. Then, countless stars gathered in one place and turned into a long sword, falling into the hands of the last Han Jin. Rinnel was ecstatic. Just as he was about to roar, a fire dragon shot from the left towards a behemoth warrior. The behemoth warrior raised his right fist and punched the fire dragon. With a loud bang, the fire dragon was shattered. The fire splashed onto the behemoth warrior's arm and continued to burn. Then, the behemoth warrior punched the ground, and the tip of his fist sank deep into the ground. When he pulled his fist out, the fire had already extinguished. Lydia felt helpless and inferior. They were both using magic, but why couldn't she compare to Raphael? Your brothers are getting fewer and fewer, Han Jin said with a smile. Then, he lazily carried the purple lightsaber on his shoulder. The white flames were still burning quietly. The two behemoth warriors had fallen to the ground at some point in time, but the flames did not let them go. They were still burning on their bodies. They had already turned into volcanoes, real volcanoes. There were also 4 behemoth warriors who were either running madly or rolling on the ground. Every time their 20-meter-tall bodies rolled, they would let out a thunderous sound, and their painful howls would resound through the sky. Chapter 425. Not until then did Rinnel notice the injured behemoth warriors. Although he had heard the painful roars of his brothers, he did not expect the situation to be so serious. 2 behemoth warriors were lying on the ground, still motionless. Obviously, they were already dead. The rest of them were still struggling desperately. The flames released by Han Jin were extremely terrible. No matter what they did, they could not stop the flames from spreading. If this continued, they would be devoured by the flames sooner or later. Rinnel only felt a sharp pain in his heart. They were still a group of children. They could not even release the complete ultimate berserk spell. After transforming into behemoths, they could not speak, express their pain, or ask for help from their brothers. After a moment, Rinnel asked in a bitter tone, why? At this point, he had completely understood that Han Jin not only wanted to occupy his Bite Man, but also wanted to destroy all of them. No reason. Han Jin replied indifferently. I can't think of when such a deep hatred was planted between us. Hatred? Han Jin smiled. In fact, there is no hatred between us. Rinnell was stunned and had to return to the first question. Why? Since there was no hatred, why did he want to kill them all? This question could not be answered. It was as uncomfortable as having a fishbone stuck in his throat. When you killed others, did you ever explain it to others? Han Jin's eyes showed a touch of ridicule. In fact, you also know that we can't be real allies. You are willing to ally with me, but you just want to rest temporarily. If you have the power to kill me, to destroy the allied forces of the Holy Crown City and the elves, will you stay in the Bite Man obediently? Really? Han Jin's words were harsh, but it was a bit unfair to force these words on Rinnell. In the Age of Chaos, almost every lord would try to strengthen their own forces. War, expansion, war, these were the main themes of the Age of Chaos. Not only Rinnell, but almost every lord would choose this path. It was the same for Guevara, Zagund, and Dismark. Later on, the elves also chose to expand. Ambition was never lacking. What they lacked was power. If ambition was a crime, then all lords should be punished. Rinnell slowly clenched his huge fists, and the crisp sound of his knuckles cracking could be heard. He was furious, but he didn't know how to counter Han Jin's accusations. Galvin had finally made his move. However, the arrow that he shot was completely out of proportion to his reputation. The strength and speed of the arrow were nothing to write home about. The behemoth warrior who was being attacked by Gao Bin raised his hand in disdain and slapped at the arrow. If the behemoth warrior's hand was like a millstone, then Gao Bin's arrow was like a needle on the millstone. The moment the two came into contact, the needle suddenly turned into a puff of smoke, and the behemoth warrior turned into a huge statue. The fluffy hair fluttered in the wind, the saliva that was about to drip down from the corner of his mouth, the contemptuous look in his eyes, and the raised giant palm. The behemoth warrior was completely frozen in place, not moving at all. Just a few meters away from him, the other behemoth warrior was not affected at all. His fluffy hair fluttered in the wind, and his saliva was also dripping down. The two formed a sharp contrast. If they were experts from the same era as Gao Bin, they might have heard that Gao Bin's arrows were absolutely not to be touched, and Gao Bin himself was also absolutely not to be touched. Unfortunately, after Gao Bin went into seclusion, the experts in this area had gradually forgotten about that incomparably powerful fairy. Lydia and Gao Bin had worked together many times, so they had a tacit understanding of each other. When she saw Gao Bin shoot the arrow, she immediately pulled the bowstring. The arrow turned into a fire dragon as soon as it left the bowstring. It flew straight towards the behemoth warrior who had turned into a statue. Lydia's arrow was much faster than Gao Bin's arrow. The fire dragon left a trail of afterimages in the air and hit the behemoth warrior. A shocking scene appeared. The fire dragon also inexplicably turned into a statue. Thousands of dancing tongues of fire froze at the same time. From afar, it looked like an extremely absurd picture. A giant beast was using its eyes to shoot out raging flames. Another behemoth warrior was shocked. He took a step forward and stretched out his hand to grab the fire dragon. However, the moment his hand touched the fire dragon, he turned into a statue, just like his brother. What was even stranger was that his posture was very unbalanced. When he took a step forward, the soles of his feet didn't touch the ground. His whole body tilted forward, as if he could fall down at any moment. Lydia kept pulling the bowstring, and fire dragons were shot out one after another. No matter how fierce the fire dragons were, they would freeze as soon as they touched the target. In just a breath's time, more than a dozen fire dragons had appeared in front of the two behemoth warrior statues. The elves also launched their arrows in unison, and the rain of arrows had already enveloped all the behemoth warriors. However, as long as the arrows were close to the two statues, they would freeze in place like the fire dragons, not moving at all. Rinnell used his arms to protect his head and took a few steps back. He didn't care about the attacks of the elves. Their magic resistance was low, so they had strong physical resistance. This was the compensation given to them by the beast god. Suddenly, the two statues in front of them moved. At the same time, more than a dozen fire dragons and thousands of arrows moved at the same time. Boom! The fire dragons exploded together, and the flames from the explosion also joined together to form a giant fireball with a radius of 100 meters. The two behemoth warriors rushed out of the fireball in a sorry state. Although the adhesion of the flames was not as strong as the three true fire, the collective explosion of the fire dragons could not be underestimated. There were shocking wounds on the bodies of the two behemoth warriors. They were also blind. With Lydia's experience and archery skills, of course, she wouldn't choose the thickest parts of the behemoth warriors. The bucket-sized pupils were the best targets. Normally, if the behemoth warriors wanted to dodge, Lydia's fire arrows would have a hard time hitting them. However, the distance between the fire dragons and them was infinitely close. The moment the behemoth warriors returned to normal, the fire dragons had already exploded. They didn't even have time to blink, let alone dodge, unless they could transcend time or manipulate time. Renal roared and rushed towards Hanjin. The behemoth warriors behind him immediately split into several groups. Two behemoth warriors rushed towards Lydia, two behemoth warriors rushed towards Gao Bin, and the last one followed behind Renal. These behemoth warriors were the last of the Golden bloodline. Lydia whistled and quickly retreated with the elves. However, they were mounted archers, so it didn't matter if they were moving forward or backward. It didn't affect their ability to shoot arrows. Countless arrows landed on the two behemoth warriors one after another. Some of the arrows bounced off the behemoth warriors' strong bodies, while some only pierced a little. As the behemoth warriors ran, the arrows were flung off their bodies. With the strength of the elves, this was their limit. Lydia was now shooting ice arrows. She knew that the elves couldn't inflict heavy damage to the two behemoth warriors. Therefore, her goal was to stall for time until Hanjin or Gao Bin finished off the behemoth warriors. Gao Bin didn't move. His eyes were extremely focused, and his gaze was fixed on the tip of his arrow. He didn't move at all, and even his breathing stopped. It was as if he was preparing something. Then the arrow whizzed out. However, compared to the behemoth warriors, the elves had already raised Gao Bin's threat level. When the behemoth warrior in front saw Gao Bin attacking him, he focused on the direction of the arrow. He took a big step diagonally and dodged far away. The behemoth warrior behind him also dodged to the side, afraid that he would be caught in the crossfire. You should have done this long ago. Hanjin smiled, as if to encourage Rhinelander. He then raised his right arm and swung it down with all his might. When Hanjin raised his right arm, the purple light on the long sword shone brightly. The light on the long sword extended for more than 100 meters. Then, the purple light slashed towards Rhinelander's head at an unimaginable speed. Lionel's feet heavily stomped on the ground, and his body deviated from his original direction. Hanjin's long sword slashed down from the side of his body by a hair's breadth, creating a line of smoke and dust. A long and straight crack appeared on the ground, but because the crack was very thin, it was hard to tell how deep it was. Lionel had no time to think about what would happen if the sword landed on his body. At this point, there was no point in being afraid. With a roar, he stomped on the ground again and dashed toward Hanjin like a bolt of lightning. Hanjin's figure disappeared and appeared beside Rhinelander. His long sword swept out, and the purple light left a fan-like afterimage in the air, like a semicircular mirror. Although he had already decided to fight to the death, Rhinelander couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. In fact, it wasn't just him. Many experts felt powerless when facing Hanjin. He could hide in the embrace of Mother Earth at any time, which was already a headache. However, Hanjin also had the ability to teleport, which was on par with the abyssal demons. He could even use magic to give himself a second life. How could he kill such an opponent? Moreover, Hanjin's attack power was far above that of the abyssal demons. He had large-scale destructive magic that was comparable to a forbidden spell. He also had incomparably mystical magic tools and so on. Rhinelander, on the other hand, was only fighting with his bare hands. Even though his heart was filled with grief and indignation, He couldn't help but admit that if he had another choice, he really wouldn't want to continue fighting. Seeing that the purple light was about to reach him, Lionel let out a roar and leaped dozens of meters into the air. His direction also changed, and he fell directly toward Hanjin, who had changed his position. Hanjin's figure disappeared again and then appeared at the place where Rhinelander had jumped. He waved his long sword at the sky. Rhinelander had already jumped into the air, and he had nowhere to borrow strength or change his direction. He could only roar angrily and tense his body, preparing to forcefully resist that gorgeous purple light. Boom! The sword light mercilessly lashed out at Rhinelander's body, leaving behind a long trail of blood from the top of his head all the way to his tailbone. The torn hair fluttered in the air like snowflakes. Another behemoth warrior arrived and waved his giant fist, smashing it toward Hanjin's head. However, because Hanjin's figure is too short, he could only raise his butt and bend his waist. His posture was somewhat ridiculous. Hanjin formed an incantation and threw out a true samadhi fire from his hand. Then, his figure disappeared again and reappeared at the side of Lionel. He waved his long sword and slashed at Lionel from his side. Rhinelander's body still hadn't landed on the ground. Only now did he understand how dangerous jumping into the air was. However, it was too late for regrets. He could only tense his muscles like before. With a boom, the sword light struck Rhinelander. Blood splattered everywhere, and another long wound appeared from his right shoulder to his left waist. The behemoth warrior who was attacked by the three true flames was well aware of the power of the flames. He hurriedly withdrew his fist and rolled away to avoid the flames. As for Rhinelander, he had already landed heavily on the ground. The tearing pain caused him to involuntarily stagger. Hanjin moved behind Rhinelander like a ghost. Of course, this behind referred to the direction. The distance between him and Rhinelander was always about 100 meters. Then, he waved his long sword and the sword light was already slashing toward Rhinelander's neck. Rhinelander suddenly turned around and raised his arm to protect his body. Then, he quickly rushed toward Hanjin. Bang! The light from his sword left a deep wound on Lionel's arm, and another wound extended from his earlobe to his chin. Lionel was forced to turn in the direction of the light from his sword, and his body stopped abruptly. He didn't understand why Hanjin's magic prop had turned on its own when he had used his arm to protect his body. He had clearly used his arm to protect his body. So how could Hanjin's magic prop turn on its own? However, Hanjin clearly didn't want to give Rhinelander any time to think. He released the ground-shrinking spell again and appeared behind Rhinelander. The sword light was merciless. The behemoth warrior's attack power was extremely strong. His charging speed was fast, and his reaction speed wasn't slow either. He was worthy of being called a top-grade creature, but these were far from enough. His attack power was strong, but he couldn't hit Hanjin. His charging speed was fast, but he couldn't get close to Hanjin. Hanjin's figure flashed around like a ghost, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, sometimes left, and sometimes right. In this 8 gates heavenlock matrix, he was the omnipotent ruler. Gusts of cold air floated in from afar. The magicians of the Phoenix Army had once again released a large-scale spell, the Blizzard Enchantment. In the Phoenix Army, fire magicians were the dominant force. More than 70% of them were fire magicians. However, this didn't mean that the Phoenix Army lacked other types of magic. In the face of thousands of Thunderbirds, the fire mages had been fighting on the front line to buy time for their companions. After all, humans were intelligent creatures. They could not fight like two idiots, punching each other and fighting each other. That was not worth it. The Blizzard Enchantment released by more than 60 water magicians covered a wide area. On the ground, white frost quickly spread to the surroundings, turning the plains and hills into a silvery white color. In the air, countless snowflakes collided and danced everywhere. The Thunderbirds could no longer see what was in front of them. Moreover, they felt that their wings were getting heavier and heavier. Layers of extremely small ice chips stuck to their feathers. Even their sharp beaks and claws were frozen. Their bodies became more and more bloated. In the end, they couldn't bear the gravity and flew lower and lower until they fell straight down. The human magicians released magic shields and magic shields to greatly reduce the impact of the cold air. To a certain extent, the magical beasts were fragile because they had limited means to rely on. A few legions that were still fighting bitterly gradually endured the most difficult moment. The orcs launched a fierce attack on the front lines that were more than 10 miles long. The total population of the orcs was in the hundreds of thousands, but how many elite Gale Wolf warriors could there be? The legions were forced to retreat again and again by the orcs. They had already retreated 700 to 800 meters. They were even close to Hanjin, Gao Bin, and the others. In this narrow area of 700 to 800 meters wide, corpses were densely packed. The human corpses only accounted for a small portion. Most of them were orcs and Gale Wolves. Moreover, the new great shaman Theodore had used the tactic of breaking through the center. He had reserved 50,000 of the most elite Gale Wolf warriors in the center, but those warriors had suffered a terrible baptism. Beginning with Yelena's 9-grid Thundercall and Sunir's Whistling Arrow, Hanjin's Red Lotus Fire, Yelena's 9-grid Thundercall and Thunder Explosion, and finally, Yelena's Lightning Storm. These spells were all terrifyingly destructive, causing the most elite Gale Wolf warriors to suffer a devastating blow. Although there were many Gale Wolf warriors deployed in other directions, their combat power was not as strong as the main force. Moreover, from the beginning to the end, the orcs had been using the Gale Wolf warriors to charge forward. At this point, they were finally exhausted. When the beastmen with inferior weapons rushed forward, and when the female beastmen and the little beastmen rushed into the 8 gates Heavenlock matrix, the pressure on the legions was greatly reduced. Like a spring, when the pressure was reduced, the rebound was inevitable. The legions launched a counterattack. Although they had fought bitterly until now and were physically and mentally exhausted, the orcs had just rushed out of the blizzard enchantment. Their movements were as slow as zombies. If it weren't for the 8 gates Heavenlock matrix effectively blocking the cold air outside, they would have frozen to death. In comparison, the orcs had the absolute advantage. No matter what, they were still regular warriors. The god of war had been flying along the battle line, and the cannons on the side were constantly firing. When the god of war changed direction, it was the turn of the cannons on the other side to fire. This allowed the 2 cannons to take turns to rest. As for the people on the ship, they couldn't rest. The magicians, led by Hogan, had already entered a state of madness. They had consumed a large number of magic crystals. In the past, this was unimaginable. The feeling of the cannons firing at the same time could only be described with one word: awesome. Chapter 426. Hanjin's attack frequency was very high. In just one breath, Hanjin could change directions and swing his sword more than 10 times. Relying on his outstanding reflexes and incomparable speed, Lionel avoided most of Hanjin's attacks. However, 7 or 8 wounds appeared on his body. Fortunately, he had extremely tough skin. If it were any other creature, even a giant dragon, Hanjin would have killed him on the spot. What was even more tragic was that all the effort he had put in and all the pain he had endured was just a struggle at death's door. This was because he was facing an opponent that he could not defeat. From beginning to end, he could not even get close to Hanjin. If this continued, there was only one result waiting for him: death. Where is this human lord's fatal weakness? Lionel roared as he tried to think. Hanjin did not give Lionel any time to think. In fact, he did not have much time. Dominique was severely injured and needed immediate treatment. Yelena's spiritual power and magic power were severely overdrawn and needed immediate support. He could not fight with Lionel for an unlimited amount of time. Suddenly, Hanjin appeared on Lionel's right side. The distance between the two was about 50 meters. This distance was very dangerous. Lionel only needed to take a step forward to get close to Hanjin. Of course, Hanjin's attack could also hit Lionel faster. A mirror-like sword light spilled out from Hanjin's hand and swept toward Lionel's ankle. In Lionel's eyes, Han Jin's figure was very small. If Han Jin had just kept moving and did not attack, Lionel might have had to search around to find Han Jin. However, the sword light released by Han Jin was very eye-catching, so when it swept out, Lionel immediately noticed it. However, because of the lesson from the beginning, he did not dare to jump into the air. It was also too late to turn around and attack Han Jin. He could only continue to charge forward, trying to escape the attack range of the sword light. Han Jin's attack was very fast, and Lionel's reaction was not slow either. However, his position and angle of dodge were a bit disadvantageous. As a result, his left foot dodged the sword light, but before it landed on the ground, his right foot, which was supporting his body, was hit by the sword light. Bang! A streak of blood blossomed from Rhinelander's ankle, and he couldn't help but stagger. He used his claws to support his body in time, but at this moment, a figure jumped into his line of sight. That's it. Lionel was overjoyed. He stood up abruptly and roared, "Follow me!" The two behemoth warriors who were attacking Lydia suddenly turned around. Together with Lionel and the other behemoth warrior, they were like four hills, rushing straight in one direction. Gao Bin was leading the elves to deal with the behemoth warriors. When he saw Lionel and the other three behemoth warriors give up on Han Jin and Lydia and charge towards him, he was a bit surprised. Then he immediately understood the behemoth warriors' intention. They were not attacking him, but Sunir, who was lagging behind. Han Jin did not immediately react, as Lionel had expected. He lowered his head and silently stared at the sword light in his hand. A trace of a contemptuous smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. There was no point in playing tricks in his 8 gates Heavenlock matrix. When Sunir saw the behemoth warriors suddenly charge towards her, she was shocked at first, but quickly calmed down. She waved her hand and signaled for the elves to quickly disperse. Then she slowly drew her longbow and aimed at Lionel. 300 meters. 200 meters. Lionel's eyes were filled with joy. He began to think again. Should he kill Sunir or find a way to take Sunir as a hostage? Before he could make up his mind, Sunir's figure suddenly disappeared. The next moment, Han Jin appeared where Sunir had been. He held his sword horizontally in front of his chest and silently stared at them. Lionel's footsteps stopped abruptly, as if he had just seen thousands of Han Jin. He couldn't believe his eyes, and his body was trembling. It was because of despair, the despair that came from the depths of his soul. "It's useless." Han Jin slowly shook his head. The behemoth warriors looked around blankly and realized that Sunir had completely disappeared. Lionel clenched his fists tightly, then slowly relaxed them. His courage and willpower had completely disappeared at this moment. He knew very well that he and his brothers were like a group of clowns locked in a metal cage. Their resistance would only be laughable. The best result was that they would die of exhaustion. So, should they continue to fight? The elves under Lydia's command surrounded Lionel. Together with the elves under Gao Bin's command, they drew their longbows and shot arrows at Lionel like raindrops. Han Jin also raised his longsword and slashed at Lionel. Lionel did not react. It was only when the sword was less than a few meters away from him that he woke up from the screams of the other behemoth warriors. However, it was already too late. He only had time to tilt his head. Boom! Han Jin's sword brushed past Lionel's cheek and landed on his shoulder. It even tore off one of Lionel's ears. Blood flowed out like a waterfall. The unbearable pain made Lionel let out an earth-shattering roar. It was also because of this pain that his fighting spirit was reignited. He did not care if he was really a clown or if his resistance was laughable. He had to continue fighting. He could lose to others, but he would never lose to himself. At least, the latter meant that he had not given in. Moreover, the fate of the entire Beastman race was in his hands. If he could kill or injure Han Jin, his clansmen would have a great chance of escaping. He was not fighting for himself. Even if there was only a 1 in a million chance, or even if there was no hope, he would not give up. Then, I will let you see the unparalleled bravery of the behemoth warriors. Even if this was the last time, Lionel suddenly took large strides and rushed straight towards Han Jin. This time, He would not dodge Han Jin's attack. Lionel was betting. He was betting that before he fell, Han Jin would reveal a flaw or make a mistake. The other behemoth warriors seemed to have sensed Lionel's will and rushed towards Han Jin. Han Jin waved his right hand and drew out a long purple light curtain. The sword slashed towards Lionel's head. Lionel really did not dodge. He only raised his left hand above his head to support himself. His speed suddenly increased by a lot. His huge body forcefully broke through the air, and a faint whistling sound could be heard. Bang! The sword slashed open a bloody groove on Lionel's head. Then it swept past Lionel's arm and forcefully cut open his nostrils and lips. The wound extended all the way down to his abdomen. Lionel's figure was less than 50 meters away from Han Jin. He opened his right claw and grabbed towards Han Jin. He was only one step away from saving his own race. Han Jin's figure disappeared from his original position and reappeared 100 meters behind the behemoth warriors. He then raised his long sword and attacked Lionel's back. Lionel suddenly turned around and continued to rush towards Han Jin. He still ignored Han Jin's sword slash. A distance of 100 meters was just a matter of 2 or 3 steps for the behemoth warriors. However, Han Jin disappeared again. Galbin had already raised his longbow. He was ready to help Han Jin, but slowly he put down the longbow little by little. His face first showed a look of astonishment, then moved, and finally turned into a sigh. Han Jin's figure flickered like a ghost, and the dazzling and profound sword light rose and fell one after another. Every sword light accurately hit the opponent, and none of them missed their target. Forza had almost killed all of his brothers, but his children had shown a shocking unity. The 6 behemoth warriors were constantly chasing after Han Jin's figure. Of course, they would be attacked if they rushed to the front, but their brothers would have a better chance of surviving. The last few behemoth warriors were using their own lives to fight Han Jin. They only needed one chance. Either Han Jin was exhausted, or Han Jin's magic was ineffective. Sunir was forcibly transferred to the god of war, but how could she stay idle? In the middle of the Allied army's defense line, the last elite orcs had launched an attack. In addition to thousands of Gale Wolf warriors, there were also thousands of shamans. The Thunderbirds had been completely destroyed by the Undead Bird Legion, so the shamans were useless. They followed behind the Gale Wolf warriors and desperately supported them with magic. Bloodthirst, Stone Skin, Flame of the Soul, and various other halos were constantly flashing. No one cherished their magic power. They were like people who knew they would not live long and desperately squander their wealth. Yelena's body was on the verge of collapsing. Countless fine cracks had appeared on her unique wand, which made those who saw it very worried. Would the wand shatter into pieces with just a touch? Let me do it. Sunir appeared behind Yelena, then took a few steps forward and blocked her. Go back and rest. Sister Sunir. Yelena couldn't describe her feelings at this moment. Hearing Yelena's call, Sunir slowly turned her head and looked at Yelena. Their eyes met. Ever since Yelena and Han Jin had been together, they had always deliberately avoided each other's eyes. They had never looked at each other for such a long time. Their eyes were different. Sunir was calm, but Yelena's eyes were somewhat weak, as if she was waiting for something. After a long while, Sunir smiled and said softly, "Go back. I'm here." "Okay." Yelena nodded and smiled. With the help of Guevara, Dominguez had already crawled out from under the behemoth warriors. Her broken right arm was twisted beyond recognition, and the elbow was completely torn apart, revealing the white bone stubble. Her whole body was covered in blood, and it was impossible to tell which blood belonged to her and which belonged to the behemoth warriors. However, the silver light in her eyes was still as sharp as ever, and she stared coldly at the Storm Wolf warriors who were getting closer and closer. Guevara wanted to persuade Dominguez to go back and rest, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He could feel that Dominguez's murderous intent hadn't weakened because of her injury. Sunir slowly pulled the longbow, and the mark of God on her forehead suddenly lit up. Then, her fingers relaxed, and the arrow was shot out like lightning. There was an ear-piercing shriek in the air, and wherever the arrow passed, it left behind a blurry world, as if there was some kind of power vibrating and surging in it. Clouds of blood mist exploded on the storm wolf warriors nearby, and the shouting shamans behind them were also affected. Sunir's arrow had forcefully plowed a bloody path that was hundreds of meters long and dozens of meters wide among the orcs. The stone skin and other magic that the shamans had cast on the storm wolf warriors didn't have any effect. As long as they were within the range of the whistling arrow, they were all torn into pieces. Sunir's face turned pale, and her body couldn't help but shake, as if all her strength had been sucked out. Dominguez, I'll leave Sunir to you. Guevara finally found a reasonable excuse. Then, he raised his dragon spear and rushed forward. The dawn of victory had appeared in front of everyone. No matter how desperate the orcs were, they couldn't cover up their lack of fighting power. The counterattack of the legions of the Holy Crown City was getting fiercer and fiercer. They not only pushed the battle line back, but also kept rushing forward. Finally, they could see the figures of the magicians of the Phoenix Legion. The Immortal Bird Legion had contributed a lot to this decisive battle. With the attack of the exotic fire, the burning of the hell puppets, the meteor shower that covered an area of over 10,000 meters, and the blizzard enchantment, the casualties of the orcs were in the tens of thousands. Outside the 8 Gates Heavenlock Matrix, there were smashed flesh, burnt bodies, and ice sculptures everywhere. Without the help of the Immortal Bird Legion, the orcs' attack would have lasted for a long time, and the situation of the legions of the Holy Crown City could be imagined. However, the Phoenix Legion also paid a big price. Every magician in the Legion was a treasure, and they were attacked by the Thunderbirds. But at that time, they couldn't retreat and had to fight back. It was the first time they cooperated with Han Jin. When they encountered danger, they chose to protect themselves and put all the pressure on Han Jin. Not to mention whether they could forgive themselves or not when they returned to the capital of elements, who would bear the wrath of Grand Duke Solomon. The 2 Deputy Legion commanders, Tobias and Spencer, had been following Grand Duke Solomon ever since he started his business. Both parties were subordinates and friends. Furthermore, Solomon could be considered as half a teacher to them. Without Solomon's guidance, they might have been delayed by many years, or even have no hope of reaching the peak in their lifetime. Solomon had always trusted them, and they also knew how much Solomon admired the young Raphael and what expectations he had for him. Therefore, they would never plant a barrier between the 2 parties just because they cherished the combat power of the Legion. Of course, if it were another collaborator, they wouldn't have fought as hard as they did today. Han Jin kept changing his position and swinging his sword. The 6 behemoth warriors, led by Rinel, were all covered in blood. It was impossible to wait until Han Jin was exhausted, or for Han Jin to make a mistake. Dao magic was not alchemy. As long as he had enough vital energy, he could easily appear in any position in the 8 Gates Heavenlock Matrix. In a moment, he had already swung his sword hundreds of times, and every strike landed solidly on the bodies of the behemoth warriors. Rinel and his brothers were like a group of children fighting over candy. As long as Han Jin attacked, they would rush forward. This absurd scene gave people the illusion that even if something happened to Han Jin and his sword struck empty air, the behemoth warriors would still rush forward to take the beating out of habit. Han Jin didn't want to play games, and he didn't think that killing was fun. In fact, he really wanted to kill all 6 behemoth warriors with one strike, and then go take care of Yelena and Dominique. The behemoth warriors' bodies were too big. From their chests to their backs, they were 7 or 8 meters wide. They were like small mountains that could move quickly. Also, the muscles of the behemoth warriors were extremely tough. It was easier said than done to kill them in one strike. What's more, the sword light released by Han Jin was condensed from the heavenly Tao. The heavenly Tao was ever-changing and omnipotent, which meant that the heavenly Tao made from star gold didn't have a specific shape. It also meant that the heavenly Tao lacked toughness and sharpness. Sometimes the heavenly Tao could exert great power, but when facing the behemoth warriors who had huge bodies and tough muscles, its attacking power was somewhat lacking. Just as there was no perfect person in the world, there was also no perfect ritual implement. Moreover, The strongest opponent that Han Jin anticipated was not the behemoth warriors. At least half of the reason he refined the heavenly way was to deal with Nicholas. Lang Ning, who was in the riptide, issued an order. Amidst the sound of the horn, a portion of the night rushed out of the battle formation and swept toward the middle. Alexander immediately cooperated with him. Nearly 1,000 warriors separated and sandwiched the remaining Gale Wolf warriors and shamans in the middle. The impact of the orcs was getting weaker and weaker, so they could easily take care of other battlefields. The battle seemed to be coming to an end. Almost all of the orcs that rushed into the 8 Gates Heavenlock Matrix were annihilated. Those who staggered in behind were killed one after another. There was no need for the core experts to take action. However, they were not in a hurry to go back to rest or heal their injuries. Guevara, who had put away his spear and stood upright, Dominique, who was holding her arm, Sunir, who seemed to be in a daze, and Yelena, who had returned to the God of War, were all watching another battle. It was Han Jin's battle, a battle of 1 against 6. Everyone had seen the combat power of the behemoth warriors. Guevara and Dominique were fighting against 2 behemoth warriors. Under the sudden attack of the behemoth warriors, Dominique was severely injured. But what about Han Jin? He was challenging 6 behemoth warriors. It was normal to bully a few with numbers, but it was more or less sensational to bully a few with numbers. However, Han Jin was bullying the 6 behemoth warriors. Facing one fierce and ferocious beast after another, Han Jin was relaxed and at ease. Every move he made was an attack. The Matrix was a supreme weapon for the weak to defeat the strong. Being in the 8 Gates Heavenlock Matrix, he had too many ways to protect himself. Although the behemoth warriors were also attacking, they couldn't even touch Han Jin's shadow. They could only run around in vain. What kind of combat power was this? Guevara's expression was the most complicated. Seeing a young man whom he had high hopes for growing up so quickly and gradually catching up with him, he felt very happy and gratified. However, the young man did not stop chasing after him. He continued to grow quickly and surpassed him in a short period of time. His joy and gratification were all replaced by shock. Chapter 427. Han Jin's eyebrows twitched, and a trace of anger appeared in his eyes. When Rinel brought his brothers to charge at him again, Han Jin didn't draw his sword. Instead, he held his sword in his left hand and took out a talisman from his space ring. He then flipped his hand and threw into the air. The talisman rapidly expanded in the air and instantly turned into a 10-meter-long scroll. There were all kinds of strange square characters drawn on it. Next, Han Jin flipped his hand and pushed it. The scroll suddenly turned into a giant lightning bolt and shot out. The speed of lightning was unparalleled. No one could surpass it, and the behemoths were no exception. The behemoth warrior who was rushing forward was hit by the lightning bolt. His body paused for a moment before he was sent flying. His huge body somersaulted 4 to 5 times in the air and flew 300 meters before heavily smashing into the ground, causing a cloud of dust to fly. However, the behemoth warrior was lying face down, so others couldn't see his injuries. They could only see that his body was constantly twitching. His huge head was in the pit, and there were no signs of him raising his head or twisting his body. Rinel and the other behemoth warriors came to a sudden stop. Han Jin didn't need to change his position anymore. He took out another talisman from his space ring and coldly looked at Rinel. In Han Jin's personal collection, lightning element magic crystals were the most abundant. Therefore, after he was able to absorb the energy of 9th rank magic crystals, he had always used lightning bird magic crystals as his main source of energy. Aside from providing energy, magic crystals could also provide a large amount of pure elements. Han Jin was a cultivator and didn't want to accumulate elements in his body. He had to think of ways to use up the elements. The best choice was naturally to make talismans. Among the various talismans that Han Jin could make, the Red Lotus Hellfire was the most powerful. However, other than the legendary god of creation, it seemed that no one could casually convert the elements. Even other gods couldn't do it, let alone Han Jin. Lightning element could only be used to make lightning talismans. Han Jin thought about it and decided to make heavenly thunder. The one heavenly righteous lightning was a great aid in slaying demons and devils. The word righteous naturally referred to the righteous path and righteous energy. Using the one heavenly righteous lightning to attack all kinds of demons could cause devastating damage. The power of charms made of pure elements would be greatly enhanced. Han Jin had already experienced this when he first released the fire charm. However, he didn't expect the one heavenly thunder to be so ferocious. The behemoth warrior was sprinting at full speed, and the force of his body could be described as tens of thousands of kilograms. After calculating, he would be able to create more than 500 bolts of first heavenly thunder, and this was the lowest estimate. It was enough for him to use. Han Jin no longer hesitated and threw out the talisman. Just as Rinel and his brothers turned around, a bolt of lightning struck them. Before they could react, one of the behemoth warriors was blown away. Yelena, who was on the god of war, could hardly believe her eyes. The magic released by Han Jin was similar to the thunder god's forbidden spell, but its appearance was somewhat different. No matter how powerful Han Jin's other magic was, Yelena could accept it with joy and was proud of it. However, now that Han Jin had reached into her domain and even surpassed her, Yelena had a very strange feeling in her heart. The figures of the magicians of the Phoenix Legion became clearer and clearer. When the two legions converged, of course, it meant the destruction of the orcs. At this moment, there were not many orcs left. The blizzard enchantment was still in effect, but the magicians of the other branches of the Phoenix Legion were not idle. They had been releasing magic without holding back. The new great shaman, Theodore, stepped onto the chariot. The chariot was 2 stories high and was pulled by more than 20 mammoths. In fact, it was just a small chariot. The chariot that symbolized the royal power had been left in Bite City. Forza's chariot was too big, and it took a lot of effort to move it into the city. Now that they were going to war, there was no time to move it out. Perhaps, when they abandoned the chariot, the end of the orcs had already been revealed. On the tower of the chariot sat a woman in white. Perhaps due to the contrast of the other beastmen around her, she had a dazzling seductiveness. She definitely didn't look like a beastman, but the fact that she could remain seated in front of Theodore meant that she had a high status. No matter how beautiful the humans and elves were, they were nothing more than slaves for the beastmen to play with. They didn't have any status at all. Theodore's voice sounded a little choked. More than a dozen high-grade shamans followed behind Theodore, and each of them looked extremely sad. I know, the seductive woman said softly. What do you know? A high-grade shaman said coldly. Obviously, he obeyed Forza. After Lionel came to power, he did not have to carry out an internal cleansing because of the special circumstances of Forza's death. This left a hidden danger, and some shamans were very dissatisfied with Lionel's actions. Shut up. Theodore turned back and roared. The shaman wanted to talk back. Anyway, the orcs were in trouble, and he did not have to worry about anything. Everyone would die together. But when he saw the anger in Theodore's eyes, he paused and finally closed his mouth. Lionel often talked to me about Raphael, the seductive woman said calmly. The seductive woman didn't seem angry. She only said, I could see that he was afraid of Raphael. Ha! Of course, he wouldn't admit it. He only said that Raphael deserved our respect. At that time, I knew that if Lionel lost one day, it would be to Raphael. What Lionel fears the most should be Grand Duke Solomon. The shaman who was loyal to Forza could not help but say. His subtext was very clear. Solomon was qualified to be the opponent of the orcs. Raphael was not worthy at all. They had lost because of Lionel's incompetence. If Forza was still alive, no one would be a match for the orcs except Solomon. It's not the same. The white-clothed woman smiled. Her smile was extremely beautiful and charming. It's not just Rhine. We all fear Solomon, but we will never forget to kill Solomon and avenge our dead clansmen. Rhine also did not forget. But for Raphael, Lionel did not want to win, nor did he want to surpass Raphael. He tried hard to be friends with Raphael. So he lost long ago. A warrior who no longer dares to move forward. A king who has lost his domineering spirit is shameful. Compared to Forza, he is too weak. Yes, he is wrong. We can't be friends with humans at all. Lionel has forgotten the teachings of his ancestors. The shaman who was loyal to Forza saw that the woman in white seemed to admit Forza's strength, so he could not help but ask, "But why do you support Lionel?" What Solomon had told Hanjin was not wrong. The orcs were actually a race with low self-esteem, but their simple minds and extremely fierce personalities made them unable to accept their inferiority. On the contrary, they turned their inferiority into extreme arrogance. The orcs, from males to females, from the elderly to the children, including the relatively kind ones and the extremely cruel ones, all firmly believed that the orcs should be the rulers of the continent. They could not have any friends because all other races could only become their slaves. Only then would they no longer feel inferior, and their self-esteem would come from trampling on other races with force. Therefore, the orcs were always moving toward their ultimate goal. Sacrifice was for their beliefs, and endure humiliation for their beliefs. The woman in white did not respond to the shaman's question. She sighed and said, "In the beginning, the elves really wanted to ally with us, but we betrayed them. Now, Lionel really wants to ally with Raphael, but Raphael betrayed us." Theodore let out a long sigh and was speechless. After a moment, his gaze turned to a thick pillar. The woman in white observed Theodore and followed his gaze. She also saw the thick pillar. "Queen, we're going to say goodbye to you." Theodore bowed slightly. "Do you really want to do this?" The woman in white smiled helplessly. "You should know that the beast god totem has not responded for thousands of years. Other than this, what else can I do?" Theodore smiled and slowly walked over, gently caressing the thick pillar. This pillar definitely had existed for a long time. From the outside, it looked very rough, but it was extremely smooth to the touch, as if it had been touched by thousands of hands. Ha! Ha ha ha! Theodore suddenly laughed out loud, as if he had gone mad. Then, a hoarse and low chant sounded. "The great beast god, the great father. Why are we walking so hard?" Theodore used both hands to hit the pillar. Perhaps he used too much strength, or perhaps the pillar was too hard, but after a few hits, his fingertips broke and blood seeped out. "You created us, you ignored us, perhaps. All the suffering was your will." Theodore slapped harder and harder, and more blood flowed out of his palm, leaving bloody handprints on the thick pillar. At the moment before the destruction, "We beg you, listen to the children's cries of despair." Theodore became more and more deranged. Suddenly, a shaman's face turned pale, and his body fell limp. "Awaken! Awaken!" Theodore roared at the sky, and the shamans behind him fell one by one. Life sacrifice. The collective sacrifice of high-grade shamans. However, the pillar did not respond. Just as the woman in white had said, the beast god totem had not responded to the orc's call for thousands of years, and it was the same now. A trace of gray appeared in Theodore's eyes, and then it quickly enlarged. He had a mocking expression on his face, but it was unknown whether he was mocking himself or the beast god. Then his body slowly slid down the pillar. "You all go and fight," the woman in white said to the orcs. The woman in white said softly to the orc maids, "Don't forget, you are also warriors. I hope you can hold your heads high at the last moment." About a dozen orc maids knelt on the ground. Without saying goodbye, they all drew their weapons and rushed down the stairs. Suddenly, a strange ripple shook the world. The 8 gates heaven lock matrix set up by Hanjin was impenetrable. The blizzard barrier cast by the Undying Bird Army's mages could not penetrate the matrix, or the warriors of the various armies would be greatly affected. The ripples of battle within the 8 gates heaven lock matrix could be transmitted outside, and the ripples outside were blocked by the 8 gates heaven lock matrix. However, the 8 cores had the same vision as Hanjin, so they could clearly sense the outside world. However, The strange ripples that had just occurred swept through the 8 gates heavenlock matrix without any obstruction, spreading far and wide between heaven and earth. Tobias and Spencer's expressions changed drastically at the same time. Although the fluctuation wasn't very strong, it contained supreme power and was accompanied by a kind of berserk aura that pounced straight at them. Strange, very strange. Tobias quickly scanned the area below. Suddenly, he saw an orc chariot more than 1,000 meters ahead. A blood-red halo spread out from the chariot, and he also saw a thick, quaint pillar. Tobias cried out in shock. What is that? Could it be the beast god totem? Beast god totem? Spencer followed Tobias's gaze. The orcs still haven't forgotten to bring that junk with them? Suddenly, Tobias saw an unbelievable scene. A behemoth that had died in battle moved inexplicably, and then the range of its movements gradually increased, as if it was struggling to get up. Because of Solomon's influence, the knowledge of the mages in the capital of elements was several levels higher than that of other places. Tobias and Spencer were the best among them. Seeing this scene, he suddenly remembered an ancient legend. Beast soul revival. Oh my God! Spencer also saw it. His face turned ashen, and then he roared, "Destroy the beast god totem. Quick!" The mages of the Undying Bird Legion were very strong. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of meteorites fell from the sky and smashed directly into the chariot. Flames exploded around the chariot, and the meteorites could not break through the blood-red light curtain. "Charge!" Tobias yelled. "Charge inside! Quick!" With that, he suddenly sped up and took the lead to rush toward the chariot. Although the Undying Bird Legion belonged to the Magic Legion, they had the tradition of warriors. No one would shout to attack. They would only use their actions to tell everyone to follow them. This included Grand Duke Solomon. When faced with a serious threat, he would also set himself as an example. The Undying Bird Legion sped up collectively, but the strength of their magic and mental power determined their basic speed. Tobias and Spencer had already left the battle formation far behind. In the 8 gates heavenlock matrix, Rinnell and the rest of his brothers roared at the same time. They were also affected by the light curtain. Their bodies were already stained red by their own blood, and now they were completely blood-red. Hanjin glanced at the behemoth warrior who had just been blasted away by a bolt of lightning. He was slowly getting up from the ground, and his expression changed drastically. He immediately realized that it was the effect of the wave. At this moment, he could not care less. His body flashed and appeared at the edge of the 8 gates heavenlock matrix, stepping out of the matrix. 400 meters, 300 meters. The ferocious Tobias and Spencer were getting closer and closer to the behemoth chariot. At this moment, a burst of bell-like laughter rushed towards them. Spencer suddenly felt his mind shake, and he could not help but shout, "It's the Volpera!" The 2 Grand Mages were very experienced and could immediately determine what kind of enemy they were facing, but this could not change anything. The Volpera's mental attack had no lethality, but could cause a mental shock, temporarily making them lose the ability to cast spells. They did not even dare to get close, or else they would definitely fall from the sky. How could this be? Tobias and Spencer were very anxious. If those behemoths were revived with their beast souls, it would definitely be a disaster. The Undying Bird Legion would not be a problem because they could fly away, but the army of the Holy Crown City and the elves would be completely finished. Suddenly, a figure drilled out from the ground in front of the chariot and jumped onto the chariot. Hanjin also paused when he heard the bell-like laughter. He saw an extremely beautiful woman standing in front of him, whose appearance and style were far more beautiful than Yelena and Sunir. However, he only paused for a moment. Hanjin sneered. Cultivation was the most important thing, and this kind of illusion was useless to him. Chapter 428. Seeing Hanjin rush onto the chariot, the woman in white was still very calm. She took a deep breath, and 2 bright red lights appeared in her eyes. Then, she opened her small mouth, and her laughter became hurried. Han Jin suddenly felt a strong impact on his divine sense. The heavenly axiom refined by the star gold flashed rapidly with the woman in white's laughter. The connection between the dots of starlight became inexplicably weak. It was as if he was holding a sand sword, and if he swung it gently, it would turn into countless grains of sand. The four orc maids rushed up with curved swords, and the shining blades mercilessly slashed at Han Jin's neck. Almost everyone thought that Han Jin was a magician with unfathomable strength because his magic was too amazing and his magic props were too powerful. However, a long time ago, his most common way of fighting was hand-to-hand combat, so it had become a deep-rooted habit for him to cast the spirit possession spell on himself. However, his magic halo was getting more and more dazzling, so people had forgotten about his past. Han Jin didn't know what kind of power they were using to attack his divine sense. In a flash, he didn't have time to think carefully. He crossed his hands, and the purple sword light in his hand disappeared without a trace. Then his body flashed, and he dodged the four curved swords whistling towards him. He then swung his right fist, and it hit the chest of an orc maid. Bang! Han Jin felt his fist hit an extremely hard object. His fingers were faintly aching from the impact, but the orc maid was in even more pain. She screamed and couldn't help but bend over. Han Jin raised his leg and kneed her. The orc maid automatically bent over, and it looked as if she was deliberately aiming her face at Han Jin's knee. There was a loud bang, and blood suddenly bloomed. The orc maid's facial features were forcefully smashed into a pile of meat paste. Her body rolled more than 10 meters high, and she fell out of the chariot. The woman in white's expression changed. Although her maid was not as good as the elite orc captains, she was still a swordsman who could deal with humans. Now, she was sent flying with a single blow. Raphael was clearly a magician. How could he have such strong physical strength? Han Jin's eyebrows twitched. Pain, it really hurt. Was the orc's bones too hard? Or was the spirit possession too low in level? Or was it because he hadn't fought with a human for too long, so his body had become delicate? At this moment, the remaining 3 Beastman maids attacked again. The 2 Beastman maids at the front slashed at his shoulders, while the Beastman maid at the side swung her scimitar at his neck. Although his knees were a little uncomfortable, Han Jin's reaction and speed weren't affected. He took a big step back and slashed his palm at the orc maid beside him. The orc maid's scimitar missed its target, and the edge of Han Jin's palm had already cut into her throat. Bang! The orc maid took 7 or 8 steps back. She had already thrown away her scimitar, and her eyes bulged. She still covered her throat with her hands. Her body swayed a few times, and with a thud, she knelt on the ground and fell straight down. The death of their 2 companions didn't make the remaining orc maids cower. The 2 maids brandished their curved swords and rushed at Han Jin. Han Jin's body swayed, and then he kicked one of the orc maids in the chest. He then grabbed the other orc maid's wrist. The orc maid that was kicked flew back over 20 meters and then disappeared into the midst of the orc warriors. The orc maid whose wrist was grabbed struggled with all her might, but she found that Han Jin's fingers were extremely strong, as if they were cast from iron. In a moment of desperation, she actually opened her mouth and tried to bite Han Jin's arm. Han Jin kicked a curved sword with the tip of his foot, and then his right hand moved down, grasping the hilt. That orc maid was about to bite Han Jin's arm when she suddenly felt her vision blur. A cold light shot out from below and pierced her open mouth. With a plop, the tip of the sword pierced through the back of the maid's head. Her body trembled, and then she stopped moving. Han Jin threw the corpse to the ground in disgust, and then he looked at the woman in white in front of him. "You are Raphael?" The woman in white asked softly. The corner of her mouth revealed a seductive smile, and 2 charming dimples appeared on her cheeks. Her eyes were like fireworks, and her voice was as pleasant as an oriole's. "Yes," Han Jin answered casually, and then he suddenly pounced on the woman in white. He waved his fist and punched the woman in white's cheek. His punch was vicious, and it was aimed directly at the woman's nose. If she was hit by this punch, her beautiful and moving face would definitely become ugly. Han Jin could be trapped by love, but he would not be captivated by beauty. Sunir and Yelena attracted him because of their friendship, and it had nothing to do with their appearance. Even if the woman in white in front of him was unparalleled in the world, she was nothing more than a pink skeleton to him. The woman in white's pupils suddenly shrank. She did not expect that her opponent would not give her a chance to speak and directly attack her. Her innate ability was worthless at this moment. Seeing Han Jin's figure getting closer and closer, the woman in white quickly took a breath and squeezed out an ecstatic moan from her throat. Bang! No matter how ecstatic she was, Han Jin's fist had already bombarded the woman in white's nose. The woman in white's physique was very ordinary, and her body was suddenly thrown back by this punch. The back of her head heavily hit the thick pillar, and a mist of blood exploded like fireworks. From the side, half of the woman in white's head had already disappeared. Because the broken skull and the pillar were very tight, her body was stuck to the pillar, and the light in her eyes gradually dimmed. Han Jin reached out and grabbed the woman in white's hair and threw her to the side, throwing her body out of the war chariot. His gaze fell on the bloody pillar, and that strange fluctuation was emitted from this pillar. Could it be this is the beast god totem? That's good. This way he can save himself the trouble of dealing with this once and for all. Destroy it. Destroy the beast god totem. A roar came from the sky. Han Jin raised his head and met Tobias and Spencer's gaze. Tobias and Spencer wanted to immediately release powerful magic to attack the beast god totem, but Han Jin was standing next to the totem. They were afraid that Han Jin would misunderstand, and they were also afraid of accidentally injuring Han Jin. Moreover, Han Jin had surprised them one after another, and they had no choice but to believe that Han Jin should be more capable of accomplishing this task than they were. Han Jin nodded slightly in acknowledgement, then circulated his divine sense, and found that it had returned to normal. He then took a few steps back and waved his right hand. A purple ball of light appeared in his hand, and instantly condensed into a longsword. The next moment, the longsword was swung out with a roar, and a mirror-like stream of light hit the thick pillar. The stone frame used to support the thick pillar was immediately shattered, and the thick pillar was like a whip top, flying out with the momentum of the blade. It was unknown what material the thick pillar was made of, but Han Jin's attack was enough to blast a huge rock a few meters tall into powder. However, there were only rows of extremely small white spots on the surface of the thick pillar, and there was not much damage. Han Jin released the ground shrinking spell and caught up with the thick pillar in an instant. He swung his long sword, and the sword light hit the thick pillar again. The magicians of the Phoenix Legion had already flown close, and they saw a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. The sword light released by Han Jin swept from left to right, and then from right to left. Although the Beast God's totem was a legendary relic left by the Beast God on the continent, it did not have a life and could only passively fly around with the attack of the sword light. Han Jin's figure was like a ghost, clinging to the Beast God's totem without letting go. In just a moment, a human figure, a sword light, and a thick pillar drew a line. Almost every second, they could see the dazzling sword light, and almost every second, they could hear the roar that shook their hearts. Han Jin's sword was like a stormy sea, endless, and the thick beast god's totem was like a toy, flying around in the air, but never having a chance to land on the ground. Was this a magician? Even a top-level warrior might not be able to release such a fierce attack. In a moment, Han Jin had released hundreds of streaks of light in succession. He had already reached the rear of the Phoenix Legion, but the beast god's totem was far more durable than he had expected. Again and again, he attacked with all his strength, but only a few small cracks appeared on the surface of the beast god's totem. The magicians of the Phoenix Legion had even forgotten to attack the beastmen and only watched Han Jin's performance. Many of them imagined in their hearts, if they were to receive Han Jin's attack, what would happen? The answer was obvious. They could not fight back, unless they gathered the strength of many people. Han Jin's forehead was slightly sweating. Although his total vital energy was close to 1,000 Xian, the consumption was too great. The Red Lotus Hellfire was released through the talisman, so it could be omitted. Setting up the 8 Gates Heavenlock Matrix, releasing the avatars, and so on had consumed a lot of vital energy. Plus, he had released the ground shrinking spell and urged the way of the heavens hundreds of times consecutively. However, Han Jin could only hold on. One by one, the behemoth beasts died, and the behemoth warriors stood up again. The legions of the Holy Crown City were caught off guard, and the casualties increased sharply. In a short period of time, the most powerful mountain legion had already lost more than 600 warriors. Even Alexander was almost killed. Fortunately, Guevara arrived in time. Gao Bin's battle was also very dangerous. When Lionel and his brothers changed, Gao Bin had already shot his arrows. Sunier saw that the middle was fine, so she rushed back. With the cooperation of Lydia and the other 2 elves, they knocked down another 2 behemoth warriors. In the end, only Lionel was left, but their efforts were in vain. The behemoth warriors who were knocked down got up from the ground and rejoined the battle. If they did not destroy the beast god's totem as soon as possible, the consequences would be unimaginable. There was no other way. Han Jin sighed. Even if the way of the heavens was very likely to be damaged, he had to try. He could not just watch his friends get hurt and die. Moreover, it seemed that there was a hand of fate playing tricks on him. Every time he crossed the dividing line, he would encounter danger, forcing him to challenge his own limits and not be able to keep his secrets. It was the same with the Tianyi Thunder just now, and now it was the same with the Way of the Heavens. Han Jin's body flashed again. This time, he appeared under the Orc God totem pole. The sword light went from bottom to top and hit the pole. With a deafening boom, the Orc God totem pole was sent flying into the sky. It flew more than 50 meters into the air. Han Jin's body paused. He silently watched the Orc God totem pole fly further and further away. Then, he raised the long sword in his hand, and a sword light shot into the sky. Following that, the starlight expanded at an unimaginable speed and turned into a giant sword. It was really a giant sword. The tip of the sword had pierced deep into the clouds. What appeared in front of everyone was only half of the giant sword. If the sword tip was a tall tree trunk, then Han Jin was a small ant under the tree trunk. The two were very different. Open! Han Jin roared. Or rather, he was roaring hysterically. That giant sword suddenly emitted a bright light. It even lit up the surrounding thousands of meters. In the next moment, the giant sword carried a kind of suffocating aura as it slashed down from the sky. That sword light was like flowing water, almost splitting the whole world in half. Compared to the giant sword, Han Jin's body was especially small. The Orc God totem pole was not much taller than Han Jin. Those who saw this sword had a strange feeling. It was as if Han Jin was using a hammer to smash a small flea. Boom! A roar resounded through the world. The Orc God totem pole, which already had numerous small cracks, could no longer bear such a super attack. The blood-red light curtain was instantly split apart, and the whole Orc God totem pole turned into numerous large and small pieces, splashing in all directions. When the Orc God totem pole was destroyed, the rampaging behemoths and behemoth warriors fell down one by one. They had already died once, but at that time, their bodies were still very fresh. But now, they were withering, collapsing, and disintegrating at a speed that could be seen with naked eyes. In just a few breaths, some places had already exposed their bones. Rhine, whose fighting strength had greatly increased, was only excited for a short time. Then, with the Orc God totem pole shattered, he staggered and fell to the ground. For the behemoths and behemoth warriors who had already died, it was no big deal. Anyway, they were already dead. At most, they would die one more time. But for the behemoths and behemoth warriors who were still breathing, they had to pay a heavy price for the temporary increase in their fighting strength. The warriors of the various legions of the Holy Crown City burst into earth-shattering cheers, which were tears of joy and cheers of being rescued from a hopeless situation. Han Jin's sword light was magnificent and brilliant. Even if it was tens of thousands of meters away, it could still be seen clearly. Every soldier knew that except for their lord, no one here could release such a powerful attack. The elves were also cheering, but some of them felt strange. After all, Hanjin was once their enemy. But more elves felt extremely lucky that Sunir had safely walked out of the illusion of the temple. This was good. Galbin had made a wise choice. This was also good. Otherwise, they would have to fight against Hanjin, which would be too terrible. Hanjin stood there quietly with his eyes closed. Drops of sweat were dripping from the tip of his nose and cheeks. If one looked closely, they would see that Hanjin's fingers were slightly trembling, but his body was still straight. Tobias and Spencer hurriedly landed. "Your Excellency Raphael, are you all right?" Before seeing Hanjin, they had discussed for a long time about how to address Hanjin. They felt that if they were too respectful, they would lower their status. As the Grand Magus and the Deputy Commander of the Undead Bird Legion, they had their own pride. If they were too casual, they would be afraid of offending Hanjin, which might even cause misunderstandings. In fact, they appreciated Hanjin very much. Of course, Grand Duke Solomon's judgment played a decisive role. But at this moment, the word Your Excellency was very natural. It had nothing to do with age, camp, or status. It was just a respect to a strong man who had surpassed them. Hanjin drove his vital energy and operated the 12 floors. He felt a little more comfortable. Then he slowly opened his eyes and smiled. "It's all right." After that, he closed his eyes again. "That's good." Tobias and Spencer looked at each other. Hanjin had consumed a lot of energy and was at the point of exhaustion. If there were enemies hiding in the dark, this was undoubtedly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. On the other hand, the fact that Hanjin was recuperating right under their noses fully proved his trust in them. "I'll stay here. You go," Spencer said in a low voice. There were still orcs that had not been eliminated. It was enough for him to stay and take care of Hanjin. Tobias nodded, then cast a levitation spell, rose into the air, and flew forward. After a long while, Hanjin slowly opened his eyes. At this moment, his eyes had regained some vigor. Then, Hanjin bent down again, picked up something from the ground, and handed it to Spencer. "This is..." Spencer was stunned. He saw that Hanjin seemed to have picked up a fragment of the beast god's totem pole. "When you return to the capital of elements, give this to my lord." Hanjin smiled. "My lord will understand." "Okay." Spencer nodded without hesitation. If Hanjin did not want to say, it was not convenient for him to ask. After returning, he might be able to find a breakthrough from Grand Duke Solomon. He had a feeling that Hanjin had specifically asked him to bring the fragment of the beast god's totem pole back to the capital of elements. There must be a very important meaning behind it, so he was very curious. In the 8 Gates Heaven Lock Matrix, Galbin had already drawn his longbow. Sunir was on his right, and Lydia was on his left. The 3 elves did the same thing, while the rest of the elves were silent, quietly waiting. Rinnel struggled to stand up, but he was already powerless. He raised his head, then lay down, then raised his head again, then lay down again. He kept growling in a low voice. Unfortunately, he could not compare to Sunir. His voice could not cause any damage to the enemy. The 3 elves released their fingers at the same time, and 3 arrows whistled through the air. Galbin and Sunir's arrows shot into Rinnel's eyes, while Lydia's fire dragon exploded on Rinnel's forehead. The elves collectively went crazy. They hugged each other, jumped for joy, and shouted, "It's over. The war is over." Chapter 429. What should they do next after the life-and-death battle? Of course, they should lie down, gasp for breath, and lick their wounds quietly. Before the outbreak of the war, everyone was always optimistic. No one had expected that the orcs, who had been fighting with their backs to the wall, would release such a powerful fighting force. As a race on the continent, they must have their own hidden heritage. This was also a lesson that should be firmly remembered. The casualties of the Allied forces could be described as tragic. The Knight Regiment of the Holy Crown City was almost completely annihilated, and their banners could be cancelled. The casualties of the 1st Swordsman Regiment and the 2nd Swordsman Regiment were nearly half. Should they merge into one regiment? The casualties of the Riptide Regiment and the Mountain Regiment were also not low. Only the Magic Regiment was in a better situation, with few casualties. The magicians always hid in the rear to release magic, and all the dangers were shouldered by the soldiers. The elves also paid a certain price, but compared with the army of the Holy Crown City, it was not worth mentioning. The Phoenix Regiment of the Capital of Elements had more than 100 magicians killed. This number seemed insignificant, but all of them were warlocks and great magicians. In a sense, Solomon's loss was far greater than that of Han Jin. Tobias and Spencer seemed to be in a normal mood. One reason was that they didn't want to affect Han Jin's mood. Another reason was that after decades of development, the Capital of Elements had established a very complete system. After returning to the Capital of Elements, they could immediately receive reinforcements from the following echelons. What's more, how could there be no casualties in a war? Both of them had been on the battlefield for a long time, so they were very clear about this aspect. After a short rest, Lang Ning led the Riptide Regiment and rushed into Bite Man City. In fact, he also knew that the orcs would not leave him anything good, but he just wanted to verify it. Sure enough, Bite Man City had become an empty city. Not to mention people, even chickens, ducks, geese, and dogs could not be found. In this area, the Bite Man had always maintained a neutral position and had not been attacked by wars. Its wealth and population density were second only to that of the Holy Crown City. When the allied forces of the Bite Man were completely annihilated by Lang Ning, it was only a blow to the military power of the Bite Man. Its economy and population were not greatly affected. Then Lang Ning launched a counterattack, and with the help of Han Jin, they quickly occupied the whole territory of the Bite Man and avoided the continuous destruction caused by the war. It was reasonable to say that the Bite Man should be prosperous, but now the Bite Man City had completely declined and was even worse than Black Raven City. It was said that the orcs were like a swarm of locusts, and wherever they went, they would leave no survivors. But it was one thing to hear about it, and another to see it with one's own eyes. Bite Man City was the hometown of Leger and Riptide Knight. When Lang Ning led the Riptide Regiment into Bite Man City, he was very confident that he could build a powerful army by taking advantage of the advantages of the Bite Man. But then things took a turn for the worse. The elves suddenly launched a war, and they retreated to the Holy Crown City. Then the orcs and the elves fell out with each other. When Lang Ning stepped into Bite Man City again, he was completely different. After returning to the camp, Lang Ning's mood became extremely low. He didn't even attend the post-war meeting hosted by Guevara. The Riptide Knight was also in a bad mood. People couldn't jump out from the cracks of rocks. They had to have parents, relatives, and friends. The Bite Man City was their home. Lang Ning needed to rest, but groups of knights came to find him. The purpose of these knights was very simple. They want to go home and have a look. At this moment, Han Jin was treating Dominguez. In order to cooperate with Han Jin, Dominguez was lying on the deck. Her right arm was twisted beyond recognition. This was not something that could be cured with a few charms. Han Jin was busy for a long time. In the end, he had to bandage Dominguez's wound himself. Although he had the most powerful team of doctors in the world, after the attack on the Holy See, Jeds had transferred all the priests back, leaving only a group of auxiliary priests. Han Jin was somewhat worried about leaving Dominguez in their care. While Han Jin was busy, Leger and Sassu came to the god of war and spoke softly with Majordomo Gale. Lorraine affectionately held Sissua's arm and acted like a little bird. At first, Sassu and Leger felt very uncomfortable. Later, they asked Leslie and found out that Sassu was Lorraine's father. Finally, Han Jin finished bandaging Dominguez's wound and slowly straightened up. Dominguez only smiled and didn't say any words of gratitude. The wildness on the battlefield had long disappeared without a trace. She had returned to her original shy self. I heard that the Archbishop of the Holy See, Jeds, is here. Tobias looked around. Why don't I see him? Tobias felt that this kind of thing shouldn't be done by the Lord himself. Archbishop. Major Domo Gale laughed. Not just the Archbishop, even the entire Holy See is here. Don't you know? Also, Jed's is no longer an Archbishop. He's the new Pope. The entire Holy See is here? Sassu was stunned. How many people are left? They knew that Nicholas had led an army to attack the mountains of the unsetting sun and destroyed the Holy See. 3 Holy Knight and a dozen cardinals, Major Domo Gale said. As for the rest, he was too lazy to say. People who had reached such heights were only interested in high-end forces that could threaten them. Only these few people left. Sassu couldn't help but widen his eyes. Yes, that Nicholas. Tobias paused and sighed. He's ruthless enough. The Emperor of Magnificent Light, huh? Major Domo Gale smiled. If he didn't even have the courage and ability to do that, I would have to question him. What right does he have to call himself the Emperor? Tobias nodded silently. A hint of worry suddenly appeared on his face. What are you worried about? Major Domo Gale asked, puzzled. Lord Solomon has recently become interested in Nikolai. Han Jin had entered their circle at some point. He was no longer the Han Jin of the past. He had slowly formed his own unique perspective on this world. Moreover, he used to be a private investigator and was good at capturing details. Tobias had a worried look on his face. Solomon must have revealed something, so Tobias could faintly feel that in the near future, Nicholas would most likely become the enemy of the capital of elements. Your Excellency, Raphael. Tobias nodded with a smile, then hesitated for a moment and replied, Yes. How did you know? When I was still in the capital of elements, Lord Solomon often mentioned Nicholas to me. Han Jin smiled. Because of Jed's, I'm also very interested in Nicholas, but I don't know much. I know a lot of things from Lord Solomon. So, that's how it is. Tobias pondered for a moment, then smiled. He felt that he understood Solomon's intentions. Nicholas had occupied more than a dozen territories. Not only did he have a magician legion that could compete with the Undying Bird Legion, but he also had a powerful Knight Legion and Swordsman Legion. His strength could be said to be the strongest in the continent. However, if Solomon and Raphael worked together sincerely, they could definitely compete with Nicholas. Jed's has been with Nicholas all this time. How could he not know Nicholas? Spencer asked. What he knows is what Nicholas wants him to know. Han Jin smiled. He suddenly had a feeling that in a sense, Solomon was treating everyone as a chess piece. If you were a car, then you should know how to go on a rampage. If you were a cannon, then you should know how to hit a cow across a mountain. You should just do your job well. You don't need to care about anything else. Tobias and Spencer didn't know that the Holy See had come to the Holy Crown City, because their job was to command the Undying Bird Legion. As long as they knew who the current enemy was and who the future enemy was, that was enough. Major Domo Gale didn't know that Solomon was interested in Nicholas, because his job was to take care of Yelena, protect her, and be the bridge between Solomon and Han Jin. He didn't need to know anything else. Of course, Han Jin wasn't doubting the friendship between Solomon, Major Domo Gale, Tobias, and Spencer. There was an explanation that wasn't necessary. A person didn't need to know everything. Otherwise, it would be very painful and heavy. In fact, Solomon didn't lack assistance. He could always understand a person's strengths and weaknesses, and then put them in a corresponding position so that they could do their best. Solomon only lacked a successor, a true successor. Because his dream was too big, even absurd, he didn't think that he could wait until that day. In the end, he could only entrust his dream to the next generation and let the successor perfect and complete it. During his time in the capital of elements, Han Jin had undergone a force-feeding education. What was interesting was that Han Jin was no stranger to this kind of education. At that time, he had forcibly memorized the entire Taoist canon, not to mention the concept of a story. What was even more interesting was that it was precisely because of Han Jin's photographic memory, his reading speed, and comprehension ability were even more sensational. In the end, he also accepted Solomon's ideals, which made Solomon pleasantly surprised. He believed that Han Jin was the successor that God had bestowed upon him. When he first brought Han Jin into the storage room, he was only trying to train him. After all, His children had disappointed him. But when Han Jin walked out, he had already confirmed it. And Han Jin could also see that under Solomon's calm expression, there was great joy. Therefore, although neither of them had made any promises, such as what Han Jin wanted to do to Yelena, or what Solomon wanted to do to help, the bond between them had become extremely tenacious. It was not inferior to blood relations. It was an inheritance of their hearts. Therefore, when Han Jin wanted the great gravity technique, Solomon gave it to him. When Han Jin wanted the immortal bird army to help him, the immortal bird army appeared. Since the Vatican is with you, why didn't they come out? Tobias asked in confusion. They were going to come. Major Domo Gale smiled bitterly. But the Vatican was attacked, and the Holy Crystal was robbed, so who dares to attack you? Tobias was moved. Seeing Han Jin's sword, which seemed to split the whole world in half, he knew very well that there were only a few forces in the world that could shake the Holy Crown City. The Dragon Realm. Major Domo Gale's answer was very simple. Tobias was speechless. The Dragon Realm was one of the few forces. What's the deep hatred between the Dragon Realm and the Vatican? Spencer sighed. The Vatican has been destroyed, but they still don't want to let it go. They even came to the Holy Crown City. The relationship between the Dragon City and the Vatican is not good, either. Tobias smiled. In fact, the former emperors and the current lords are not on good terms with the Vatican. What the Vatican did was to take a piece of the pie from others' plate, so it was impossible for them to have a good relationship with the strong ones. But because of the internal conflicts or doctrines, they could not take the whole plate away. Believers had their own beliefs, and their highest achievement was not to hold the ruling power of the whole world, but to spread the glory of the God of light all over the world. When the Vatican was at its most powerful, there was a pope who tried to overthrow the emperor, abolish the royal court, and unify the religious power and the political power. As a result, there was strong internal opposition, which even reached the level of a riot. Through the doctrine's brainwashing, a large number of priests were just pure believers, and they could not accept such a thing. As a result, the Pope gave in, and the two powers could only continue to fight like this. Did you lose a lot? Spencer asked. You mean the Holy Crown City? Major Domo Gale sighed in his heart. It seemed that he had gradually become a member of the Holy Crown City. So Spencer used the word we didn't lose anything. The Dragon Realm just attacked the Vatican. According to the style of the Dragon Realm, they should have warned the lords who dared to take in the Vatican. How could they be fine? Spencer felt a little strange. Maybe they were afraid of our Lord Raphael. Major Domo Gale laughed. Spencer could not help but look at Han Jin. The younger generation would surpass them in time. A young man in his 20s was already so powerful. What about the future? It seemed that the Dragon territory also had this concern and did not want to provoke this young man. However, the Dragon territory had given their full support to Nicholas. In the future, they would definitely be at loggerheads with him. Nicholas's rise, Solomon's waiting, and Raphael, this new star, all meant that a sign had appeared in the chaotic continent. Unification? Who would be the winner in the end? In fact, this is not the most important thing. Major Domo Gale sighed and changed the topic. Adolf is here. Adolf? Tobias was stunned and hurriedly asked, You mean, of course it's the ascetic of the Vatican, Adolf. Tobias hissed, as if he had a toothache. Then, his gaze fell on Han Jin. That guy's not easy to deal with. I know, Han Jin said with a smile, but people have to be reasonable, right? Tobias and Spencer could not help but look at each other. They felt that Han Jin seemed to have a card up his sleeve. But since it was the first time they met, it was not good for them to talk too much. They could only ignore this topic. At this moment, Guevara strode over. His face looked very serious. Guevara, what's wrong? You don't look well. Major Domo Gale asked. How can I laugh? Guevara asked back. In this battle, we have lost more than 1/3 of our forces. The casualties are too great. Everyone fell into silence. The strength of the orcs was indeed beyond their expectations. In the end, they even activated the Beast Soul Revival. Fortunately, it was activated last, and Han Jin was there. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Under the influence of the Bee Soul revival, the behemoths had become monsters that could not be killed. As long as Rinnell was willing to abandon half of the behemoths and let them charge at the front, the rest of the behemoths and behemoth warriors would protect the beast god totem pole. The allied forces could not do anything. On one side, they could not kill the behemoths, and on the other side, they could not attack. They could only obediently give way. If the battle continued, they would definitely be wiped out. And those little bastards, we've beaten them to this extent, but they are still not tired. They are still quarreling over there. Who? Are you talking about Alan Samrit and the others? Alan Samrit is a qualified warrior. He only knows how to follow orders, Guevara said. I'm talking about Winston and Saxon. What are they quarreling about? There's so many corpses. They need to be buried. It's spring now, and if they're not careful, a large-scale plague may break out. Guevara said they are not willing to. The two of them are pushing the blame to each other. After all, they're still young. They think that they have made a great contribution by fighting to the death without retreating. Raphael, you need to find a chance to teach them a lesson. They are indeed worthy of praise for not being afraid of danger, but they cannot be arrogant. They don't even listen to you. Han Jin frowned. What's the point of listening on the surface? Guevara shook his head and said, also, Lang Ning's mood is a bit strange. I went to see him, but he didn't seem to want to talk to me. Lang Ning? What happened to him? I don't know. He changed after coming back from Bite City. Guevara said, according to the Night of Riptide, Bite City has become an empty city. They didn't find anything in the city, but outside the city, they found a few pits filled with rotting corpses. Bite City has become an empty city? What about the people inside? Didn't you hear me? There are a few pits outside the city. Those who didn't escape in time were all killed. Guevara sighed. But even if they escaped, how far could they go? Could they escape the pursuit of the Storm Wolf warriors? Okay, I'll go check on Yelena first, then I'll go find Lang Ning. Han Jin nodded. You need to be mentally prepared, Guevara reminded him. What kind of preparation? Han Jin was stunned. We can attack the Bite Man in advance. Maybe at that time, the orcs won't have time to kill the people in the city. It's useless. Spencer shook his head and said, I've been dealing with the orcs for decades. I know them very well. It's useless. Even if the orcs had just conquered a city in the morning and you rushed over to help at noon, it would be too late. We know it's useless, but Lang Ning doesn't. Guevara sighed. Chapter 430. When Han Jin slowly walked into the commander's tent of Riptide, Lang Ning was sitting under the main seat. His face was as calm as water, and his lips were tightly pursed, as if he was brewing some kind of explosive emotion. There was a row of knights standing under the table. They were all generals of Riptide. Seeing Han Jin coming in, Lang Ning hurriedly stood up, and the generals also retreated to the sides. Lang Ning waved his hand and winked at the generals, indicating that they should all leave. In crisis after crisis and bloody battle after bloody battle, Han Jin had created his own absolute authority. Those generals dared to argue with Lang Ning if they were dissatisfied, but they couldn't make trouble in front of Han Jin. After bowing, they all left. Sir, why are you here? Ronning asked with a smile. Then, he turned to the side and gave up his seat. I was bored, so I walked around. Han Jin just casually sat on the side seat and smiled. I wanted to find Yelena, but she has been in deep meditation, so I didn't want to disturb her. Bored? Ha! Among us, you are the laziest. You don't care about anything. If you continue like this, Mr. Guevara will be exhausted. Lang Ning sighed. Of course, he was just joking. Han Jin was lazy, but every time there was a crisis, he would always stand at the forefront. If it weren't for Han Jin, how many of the strong men in the Holy Crown City Group would be alive today? And his Riptide would probably have been destroyed long ago. It could be said that Han Jin supported this side of the sky with his own shoulders. Don't I still have you? Han Jin smiled. Ronning was speechless. He was just joking, but now he had gotten himself involved. What a typical case of looking for trouble. But Han Jin's attitude towards power was too different. Other lords always tried their best to hold all kinds of power tightly in their hands. But Han Jin preferred to be idle. He pushed all the important military and political affairs to other lords and handed them over to others. Guevara was a commander without a title because he was always in charge of the overall situation. If Guevara was ambitious, he could totally make Han Jin a mere figurehead. But then again, if Guevara was that kind of person, Han Jin wouldn't trust him. Ahem. How is Yelena? Is she okay? Lang Ning coughed and changed the topic. This time, fortunately, Yelena, or the consequences would have been unimaginable. Yes, I didn't expect her to have such a strong combat power, Han Jin smiled. The power of magic is really amazing, Lang Ning sighed. Yelena is in deep meditation. Did you have the opportunity to find Sunir? Didn't you find her? She is very busy now, and she has a strong personality. She can't be rushed. We can only take it slow, Han Jin said. If you have the opportunity in the future, please help me put in a good word. I've already done my best. Lang Ning smiled and shook his head, but I can't be too obvious. If I'm not careful, it will have the opposite effect. Did she say anything about me? Han Jin asked. You mean, does she still like you? Lang Ning smiled. Do you really think she will talk to me about this? Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Han Jin shrugged. By the way, Lang Ning, do you have some opinions about me? Opinions? Lang Ning was stunned. He didn't understand what Han Jin meant. I could have started the war a few days earlier. Maybe we could have saved a lot of people. Sir, I'm not a fool. Lang Ning smiled bitterly. You waited for a few days for the Undying Bird Legion. The three sides joined forces and fought so hard in the end. If it wasn't for the Undying Bird Legion, what would have happened to us? Sigh. Talking about the end of the battle, Han Jin sighed in his heart. Did your knight come to you again and again? They want to go back and see? Yes. Let them have a vacation, Han Jin said. But the Holy Crown City. Ronnie was a little shocked. The Vatican was a variable. Now, several legions of the Holy Crown City had suffered a lot of casualties, while Adolf had just arrived at the Holy Crown City. Would the Vatican think that they had been waiting for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Therefore, Riptide couldn't leave at this time. It's all right. Han Jin thought for a while. I've prepared for the Vatican. Try to solve it in a peaceful way. The problem is, you want peace, but they don't necessarily want peace, Lang Ning said. In fact, it's useless to go back. Fight City is the best proof. No matter whether their family members are still alive or not, they have to see it with their own eyes. Han Jin smiled. You don't want them to complain about you for the rest of their lives, do you? Lang Ning hesitated for a moment and didn't say anything in the end. In fact, he was under a lot of pressure. So far, more than a dozen knights had come to his commander's tent. But the knights didn't ask for too much. They just wanted to go home. And Lang Ning sent some people to find Winston and Saxon. Tell them I have something to do. Han Jin said. Find them here? Yes. Han Jin paused. They're all commanders and have their own personal guards. They can't talk openly like before. If others hear it, it will be bad for their reputation. It seems that they have done something wrong, Ronning said with a smile. That's normal. As mercenaries, they're naturally a little less disciplined. Discipline. Hearing Han Jin talk about discipline made Lang Ning feel helpless. Han Jin seemed to be the person who despised discipline the most. On the God of War, there was no difference in status. They were just like friends. Only Lang Ning treated Han Jin as a friend in the beginning. But after he made a decision, he immediately changed his attitude. No matter how Han Jin treated him, he always talked to Han Jin with honorifics like sir or sir. On the other hand, people like Morrisons were used to being casual with Han Jin and didn't take etiquette seriously. Frankly speaking, he always thought that the environment on the God of War, where there was no difference in status, was extremely detrimental to the development of discipline. Therefore, ever since the God of War was built, even though Han Jin had talked to him many times and specially reserved a room for him, he had never stayed on the God of War. Moreover, he was very dissatisfied with Winston and Saxon. They went to the barracks during the day and returned to the God of War at night. If something happened, How could he command the army? A commander must have the responsibility of a commander. You can't compare to Guevara. However, Han Jin appointed Winston and Saxon as the commanders of the 1st and 2nd Swordsman Regiments respectively. He couldn't raise any objections. Moreover, he was on the same level as Winston and Saxon, so he couldn't say anything to Winston and Saxon. What's wrong? Han Jin looked at Lang Ning in surprise. He didn't seem to have said anything, but Lang Ning's expression suddenly became very rich. Although Han Jin's current identity was a lord, he was still a self-cultivator. Therefore, sometimes, he appeared to be very straightforward and didn't want to restrict himself or his friends. He could accept Lang Ning's respect, and he could also accept Morrison's carelessness. As long as there was no fundamental mistake, he wouldn't forcefully interfere. Nothing. Lang Ning smiled bitterly and then walked out of the tent. He called a few guards and asked them to immediately find Winston and Saxon. He then walked back, hesitated for a moment, and said softly, "My lord, there are some things that you should ask about." "What things?" "For example, Mr. Guevara just called for a post-battle meeting to evaluate the merits and rewards of each regiment. This kind of thing should be presided over by you." Lang Ning said, "Also, cleaning up the battlefield, sorting out the spoils of war, and some other issues related to military discipline. You should ask about them. Don't we have Guevara and you? Alexander can also help. You don't need me. We are us, and you are you." Lang Ning said earnestly, "Haha, I only know how to kill and set fire." Han Jin smiled. "I'm a complete layman when it comes to military affairs. You guys are the experts. If I pretend to know when I don't and go around giving orders, you guys will definitely scold me behind my back." Lang Ning sighed helplessly. It was a waste of time talking. In fact, his main point was not about whether he knew or not, but he was hinting to Han Jin that he must often show his authority and consolidate his authority. When Han Jin asked about military affairs, the people who were asked would naturally have to give an explanation. Gradually, it would become a habit, and then a barrier of status would quietly form. A child who had just been born pointing one hand to the sky and the other to the ground, claiming that he was the best in the world, was just a stupid story made up by Buddhists. Even if he really could speak, if he was thrown into a deserted place and starved for a few days, his slogan would definitely become, "I want to drink milk." In fact, everyone's heart was constantly evolving with the passage of time and the changes in the environment. In the past, Lang Ning would not have thought so much. Personally commanding an army, fighting on the battlefield, and creating a world that belonged to himself and his friends was his highest wish. However, as Han Jin's strength increased and the number of strong men under his command increased, Lang Ning's ambition also quietly grew, especially after he learned about Nicholas. Lord? Duke? Or Grand Duke? That was far from enough to satisfy him. He hoped that Han Jin could become an emperor stronger than Nicholas. In the words of another world, this was called the heart of the dragon. Therefore, he hoped that Han Jin could have the dignity of an emperor. Unfortunately, Han Jin's ability to put on airs was not even comparable to an ordinary lord, let alone the bearing of an emperor. He saw this in his eyes and was anxious in his heart, but he did not know how to appropriately express his intentions. Next, Han Jin and Lang Ning chatted about some things unrelated to military affairs. Not long after, footsteps sounded outside the tent, and then Winston and Saxon walked in one after another. "Lord Raphael, look, what is this?" Winston smiled as he raised the bag in his hand. "What?" Han Jin looked at the protruding shape of the bag and laughed. "Magic crystals?" "Yes, there are frozen thunderbirds everywhere." Winston said, "There are almost 10,000 of them. I have some here too." Saxon also placed a bag on the table. "Lord Raphael, our harvest this time is simply too great, haha." Saxon was extremely excited. In the past, when he was a mercenary, he would occasionally be able to obtain a grade 9 or grade 10 magic crystal, which would be enough to keep him happy for a month. Now that he had obtained tens of thousands of magic crystals in one go, the difference was like heaven and earth compared to before. Winston and Saxon had already tasted the sweetness of war. Han Jin never collected gold, silver, or jewelry, but he had an almost fanatical love for magic crystals. This was no longer a secret to the people of the Holy Crown City. Therefore, Winston and Saxon presented the magic crystals as if they were presenting treasures. Lang Ning, I heard from the Knight of your Legion that you found many Thunderbirds that had lost their ability to fly in Bite City? Winston asked. Yes. Lang Ning nodded. How many? I didn't check carefully, but there are about 6 or 7,000. Lang Ning replied. Anyway, the 2 squares are full. What about the magic crystals? Those are all living Thunderbirds. How to deal with them is up to you, my lord. Lang Ning's eyes fell on Han Jin. How to deal with them? Han Jin was somewhat puzzled. He usually only had one way to deal with holy animals, which was to kill them and take their magic crystals. My lord, you can control the Thunderbirds just like the shamans. Lang Ning said, if we can control those thousands of Thunderbirds, they will be a great help to us. So many Thunderbirds, how can we feed them? Han Jin shook his head. Of course there will be difficulties, but we have to find a way to overcome them. Lang Ning said, it's useless. Han Jin waved his hand. He used the spiritual beast sacrifice to control the little golden Thunderbirds and other Thunderbirds. The fundamental meaning of the spiritual beast sacrifice was to use one's own vital energy as fodder. How could he feed those thousands of Thunderbirds? Besides, he didn't have time. Quality was more important than quantity. More than 100 Thunderbirds were enough. Instead of spending a lot of time and energy on the Thunderbirds, it was better to help Yelena complete her breakthrough. He knew that Yelena's extraordinary performance meant that she was close to the bottleneck of a magister. Then, Lang Ning looked a little disappointed. If Lord Raphael said it's useless, then it's useless. Saxon said, leave it to me. I'll take the swordsman to Bite City. Don't worry. Han Jin said, Winston, Saxon, I'll give you a morning to rest well. You'll take over from Alexander in the afternoon. Take over from Alexander? You want us to collect his body? Saxon was stunned and then yelled. What? You don't want to? Well, let someone else do it. I'm going to Bite City. Saxon said with a smile. Who do you want to give it to? Han Jin said indifferently. Saxon looked around and rolled his eyes. Winston is fine. Don't give me that. Winston yelled with dissatisfaction. I'm going to Bite City too. To be honest, I've never been there before. You don't want to? Han Jin smiled. Riptide can't do it. I just promised Lang Ning to give the knights a break so that they can go home. The magicians of the Magic Legion have exhausted their magic power. They'll need to meditate for a whole day to recover. Alexander hasn't rested. He's not made of iron, so he needs to catch his breath, right? Winston and Saxon looked at each other. What Han Jin said made sense. Now that there were only 2 of them left, who would go? Well, I won't bother you. Han Jin smiled. Let Alexander work until noon, then Guevara and I will take over. Although we can't do much, it's better than no one. Winston and Saxon's expressions changed at the same time. After a moment, Winston stammered, Lord Raphael, we didn't mean that. It's okay. Han Jin smiled as usual. You can leave now. Han Jin's words were harsh. How could Winston and Saxon leave at this time? Winston was stunned for a moment and smiled. Well, I'll take over from Alexander. I'll go. You go to Bite City. Saxon said. Interesting. You didn't want to go when I asked you to. Now you're fighting? Winston and Saxon's expressions changed again. They didn't know what to say, and they didn't understand why Han Jin was so fixated on such a small matter. Did they offend someone? Winston, Saxon, we're friends. We've been through a lot together. I know you, and you know me. Han Jin said slowly. However, I have to remind you that this is the army. Your attitude reminds me of bargaining with the dwarves in the weapon shop. Are you doing business with me? Of course, I know you didn't do it on purpose, so I can let it go. But you shouldn't shirk your responsibilities in front of Mr. Guevara. Ronning, Kane, and Alexander will carry out Guevara's orders without hesitation. Only the 2 of you are not willing. Why? Because you're my friends? But Lang Ning, Kane, and Alexander are my friends too. Winston and Saxon looked at each other. You're not children. I've said enough. Go back and think about it. Han Jin said, "If you don't want to do business with me, then my order is that you rest until noon and then go take over Alexander's place." "Okay, you can go now." Winston and Saxon smiled reluctantly and left. After Winston and Saxon disappeared behind the curtain, Lang Ning said slowly, "Sir, if you don't change, this kind of thing will happen again in the future." "Oh." Han Jin raised his eyebrows. "Morrison's is your friend. Sasu and Leger are also your friends. They can't hide on the god of war forever. They'll have to come out and do things. When that time comes, they'll take advantage of their relationship with you to get special treatment and even refuse orders from their superiors." Lang Ning smiled bitterly. "I really wanted to take out the military discipline book and show it to Winston and Saxon. What kind of punishment will they receive for disobeying orders?" "I know what you mean," Han Jin said softly, "but I don't like that. Only when we're together can I feel at home. I called Winston and Saxon over just to let them know that I won't interfere with what they do at home. But in the army, they have to be qualified soldiers." Chapter 431. Hundreds of thousands of people participated in the war, leaving too many traces. It took the soldiers of the Holy Crown City, as well as tens of thousands of elves, more than 10 days to clean up the battlefield. Han Jin was not in a hurry to return to the Holy Crown City, because he didn't want to solve the problem by force. Although Solomon had warned him to kill Adolf as soon as he appeared, Adolf had already entered the Holy Crown City, and it was impossible for him to hide his traces to deal with such a powerful opponent. The battle between them would be earth-shattering, and there would be no disguise. At that time, he would have to break off all relations with the Holy Crown City. Han Jin had no other choice to deal with the orcs, but if he used the same method to deal with the Holy Crown, it would be against his original intention. Before the war, Gao Bin, Sunir, Lydia, and other elves, of course, were determined to fight. Majordomo Gale and Yelena also hated the orcs. Lang Ning, Alexander, and other generals who had never dealt with the orcs put forward a suggestion that the invasion of the abyssal race was imminent, and they could consider using the orcs as the vanguard. Guevara specially made a detailed calculation with them, and in the end, the young generals were all speechless. Assuming that the orcs were indeed trustworthy and willing to be the vanguard of the Holy Crown City. But the orcs were a race that didn't like to engage in production, such as food, clothing, and so on. How could they solve this problem? The Holy Crown City, under the rule of Dismark, was very rich. It had one main city, 6 sub-cities, and hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland, excluding the private fields owned by the nobles, which supported less than 70,000 soldiers. The ratio of soldiers to civilians was reasonable, and the civilians were not harmed. But suddenly, there were hundreds of thousands of orcs. How could they afford it? The orcs were willing to risk their lives for Holy Crown City, so of course, they would ask for more. Hundreds of thousands of orcs were equipped with weapons, armors, and their individual appetite was far greater than that of ordinary humans. Moreover, they liked meat, so it was impossible to give them only food. The daily consumption of hundreds of thousands of orcs was definitely an astronomical figure. Even if the Holy Crown City offered all the resources of the country to the orcs, it might not satisfy the orcs. If he didn't give them anything, or gave them less, then the beastmen would have enough reason to go out and loot. Today, this village would be destroyed, and tomorrow, that town would be looted. Would they fight then? If the Holy Crown City found Rionel and interrogated him, Rionel could pour out his grievances and take the opportunity to ask for a large amount of support. To put it bluntly, this was a kind of rascal. Either the Holy Crown City treated them well and treated them like their ancestors, or they would rob them. Would the Holy Crown City tolerate this? If he couldn't take it anymore, then he would break off the relationship. That was the stupidest thing to do. The beastmen had already obtained excellent weapons and armor, as well as time to rest and recuperate. Their fighting strength had greatly increased. Turning against them at this time was truly laughable. If they knew this would happen, why did they do it in the first place? Did they think that too few of their own had died? At that time, Han Jin was also present. His attitude was very firm. No one had the right to impose such a heavy burden on the people of the Holy Crown City. They had supported so many nobles and so many armies. How could they still support hundreds of thousands of orcs? Why? What was more, using the Beastmen was also what Amjala and Prudence had thought at that time. But what was the result? Therefore, not only did they have to fight, but they also had to destroy the Beastmen and completely eliminate this scourge. However, the Vatican was different from the Beastmen. While the Vatican gained something, they also gave something in return. Disregarding everything else, if Jed's priests were to come during the final battle between the Allied army and the Beastmen, the casualty rate of the soldiers would definitely be greatly reduced, and their combat power would increase exponentially. Most importantly, the light magic would play an incomparably huge role in dealing with the Abyss race. In fact, the Holy Church was born in the era of the four heroes. But at that time, the halo was occupied by the powerful heroes. The priests only played a supporting role, but their importance was undeniable. In the Second World War that was about to break out, the Holy Church could not be absent no matter what. Han Jin believed that in the face of the pressure from the Abyss race, Nicholas would regret it. He should not have attacked the Holy Church so early. Han Jin also believed that the great demon of the Abyss, Donald, dared to challenge the surface world because of the weakening of the unsetting Sun Mountains. Thinking deeper, Donald had been spying on the surface world, but he had not thought about when to start the war. Everything was still at the stage of probing, analyzing, and calculating. Nicholas suddenly started the war, conquered the unsetting Sun Mountains, and supported a new holy church that did not pose a threat to him. Of course, the threat to the enemy had become very small. When Donald heard this news, he would be very, very excited. He might even brazenly open the curtains of the war and cause the war to break out in advance. In fact, this was not scary. If the Abyss race rushed out from the ground at this time, Han Jin would not be surprised. Instead, he would be relieved. The surface races were not prepared, and Donald was not much better. Spreading his influence all over the Abyss world and controlling the Abyss world were two different things. The activities organized by the Purple Flower of Hell were just Donald's plans for the future, and the future was definitely not the present. The earlier Donald came out, the less prepared he would be. Moreover, this also exposed Donald's weakness, greed. He did not withstand the test of great temptation. If Donald did not make a move and waited for 10 years or decades until he was fully prepared, then he would reveal his outstanding strength. That would be really worrying. But on the other hand, if Han Jin was given 10 years to train, he would have already reached the golden body indestructible realm. In terms of high-end power, the Abyss race would not be able to compete with him. In the past 10 days, as long as Han Jin had time, he would be lost in thought, thinking about his future and the future of his friends. His decision was enough to affect the life and death of countless people, so he had to be cautious. Moreover, in the area ruled by Nicholas, because of the influence of the Vatican for countless years, there were a large number of believers and priests. So even Nicholas did not dare to go after Nicholas. Instead, he supported a new Vatican. Nicholas had a strong foundation, while Han Jin's Holy Crown City had the high-end power of the Vatican. It could be said that these were the last elites of the Vatican. Once a worldwide war broke out, the Southwest and the Northeast would become the fiercest battlefields. The Vatican was the biggest threat to the Abyss race. Of course, Donald would destroy the Vatican completely, no matter it was the real Vatican or the fake one. But he did not know where Donald, who was busy, would appear. After thinking for a while, he thought that it was more likely to choose Nicholas. After all, Nicholas was the emperor of magnificent light. Every time he thought of this, Han Jin would show a gloating smile. One had already established a centralized empire and was rapidly expanding, while the other was still in a state of disunity. Donald's focus would most likely be on the Southwest. So, should Han Jin stop? At least, he had to ensure the existence of Depew City and Cold Shadow City. Even if he had the confidence to defeat Chasam, he could not touch Chasam and give Donald a false impression, which would lead to disaster. Moreover, Lionel's last struggle had taught him a lesson. As the leader of the Titans, Cheesem's foundation would not be any worse than that of the Orcs. He only had Dominique by his side, so he did not have to use violence to solve the problem. Could he support Dominique? It was said that a gentleman was magnanimous, while a villain was always in the dark. Han Jin was a villain, but as a lord he had no choice. For his wish, for the safety of his friends, and for the future of those who had sought refuge with him, he would do it even if he was called a butcher, let alone a villain. The others did not know what Han Jin was thinking. They only knew that they had to do what they had to do, and they did their best. After the battlefield was cleaned up, the Holy Crown City and the elven race sent representatives to negotiate on how to divide the spoils and other matters. Although Lang Ning had tried his best to persuade Han Jin many times, he still did his own thing. He should have been the only one missing from the negotiations, but he still did not participate. Han Jin had his own reasons. With his relationship with Sunir, it would be blasphemous for him to sit at the negotiating table and argue with Gao Bin about who was his and who was his. Therefore, he gave Guevara full authority. If one were to speculate maliciously, did Han Jin value Guevara's health so much that he even asked Stilberg to take care of Guevara? Could it be that he already knew this would happen and was worried that Guevara would be exhausted to death? Gao Bin was in pain because he had the same concerns as Han Jin. Because of various mistakes, Han Jin and Sunir were almost separated. Although the misunderstanding had been cleared up, the progress of their relationship was very slow. He knew that Sunir liked Han Jin. If there was a conflict during the negotiations, and it affected Sunir, he would not be able to forgive himself. The future of the elven race was important, and so was his sister's happiness. However, as the supreme leader of the elven race, he could not avoid it. Lang Ning was right. Han Jin was the most undisciplined person. If he did not want to participate, he would not participate. No one could change his mind. Guevara did not have so many concerns and had made careful preparations. The Bite Man and Black Raven City were originally Han Jin's territories, but they were invaded by the elven race. Now, of course, they had to return. The Holy Crown City was conquered by Han Jin, so it had nothing to do with the elves. However, considering that the elves also contributed a lot in the last battle, and considering Sunir's feelings, Guevara planned to give up one or two of the Beatman cities and provide some material support. However, Guevara did not expect that during the real negotiation, Gao Bin would only grumble a little and accept the division, which made the concessions in his plan useless. Then, Gao Bin talked about the issue of the elven prisoners of war. This issue was of no value to Guevara, because Han Jin had already decided to release all the elven prisoners of war. Then, Gao Bin was satisfied. He was not interested in anything else. The whole negotiation process was unexpectedly fast. In less than an hour, they had reached an agreement. The agreement between the Holy Crown City and the elves was not a general non-aggression treaty, but an alliance, a real strategic cooperation. No matter who was attacked or threatened, the other party would do its best to help. The warriors of the Holy Crown City did not feel anything special, but the elves were different. They knew that as long as Han Jin was still alive, this agreement would not lose its effectiveness. It had been almost half a year since the war started at the end of autumn. Countless elves had abandoned their original homeland and gathered in Wild Willow City. However, after such a long time of hard work, all they had was Wild Willow City. They had sacrificed so much in vain and gained nothing. Most of the elves were willing to admit the truth. They could only blame everything on the orcs, but a few elves could not accept this result. However, the situation was not in their favor. The magic released by Han Jin in the final battle was too horrible, especially the overwhelming Han Jin army and the sword light that seemed to cut the world into two halves, which left a huge shadow in their hearts. In the end, they could only choose to remain silent. Tobias and Spencer of the Phoenix Army would not participate in the negotiation either, because it would give the impression that the father-in-law and son-in-law were ganging up to bully the elves. Besides, they were here to work as coolies, so they did not need to get anything. Life always showed a stupefying tenacity. To say that Bite City had become a dead city or an empty city was just a figurative generalization. In fact, it was not absolute. In the past 10 days, people kept coming out of their hiding places and walking out of the woods. When they learned that the former Lord Raphael had led an army back to bite man, and that the orc army had been completely annihilated, they were ecstatic and then burst into tears. In that kind of environment, there were not many examples of a whole family being able to escape alive. Everyone had their own sorrows. Han Jin's reputation became even more resounding. Killing Maxwell, the elder of Dragon City, had already proved that Han Jin was powerful. Facing more than 10 Bite Man warriors alone was even more powerful. On the whole continent, there were very few elves whose strength exceeded level 12. Dragon City and Dragon Realm accounted for most of them. This was also the fundamental reason why they were superior. Except for the Dragon Tribe, the number of saint-level elves or demigods of other tribes was pitifully small. In the eyes of the citizens of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light, the Emperor of Magnificent Light, Nicholas, was the strongest sword saint on the continent. In the eyes of the spellcasters of the Capital of Elements, Grand Duke Solomon should have reached that level as well. In the eyes of the Church's believers, the ascetic Adolf had already surpassed the Pope several decades ago. His strength was unquestionable. Now, another semi-god level expert would undoubtedly be added to the list, Raphael. After a few more days, Tobias and Spinoza led the undead bird army back to the Capital of Elements. Before Spinoza came, he planned to take his daughter, Lorraine, with him. However, when he said goodbye, he did not mention anything. Instead, he told Lorraine to stay on the god of war with peace of mind. She was not young anymore, so she should work hard and learn from Yelena. As for Lorraine's engagement, Spinoza had also inexplicably forgotten about it. In fact, he was not satisfied with Lorraine's engagement, but he could not find a suitable young man. Lorraine was already a great magician. How could he find a 20-year-old magister? In the end, he could only reluctantly pick one out. However, when he saw Yelena's leaps and bounds of improvement, his heart was moved, and it also made him more convinced of Solomon's vision. If Lorraine could gain Han Jin's trust and become a magister, or even a great magician, how could that idiot be worthy of marrying Lorraine? The first thing he did when he returned was to completely cancel the engagement. This had nothing to do with snobbery. If the world was peaceful and there were not so many wars, he would not have to spend so much effort. He could just find a young man with good temperament and character. However, the continent was so chaotic. Lorraine should be like Yelena and find a stronger backer. When danger came, Lorraine fought in front of the battlefield, but a useless man hid somewhere and refused to come out. Wasn't this too unfair for Lorraine? Sasu and Leger did not know this. Although they wanted to get close to Spinoza, when they looked at his status and strength and then thought about themselves, they inevitably felt inferior. They deliberately avoided contact with Spinoza. They had unintentionally taken the right step. Otherwise, with Spinoza's experience, he would definitely see through their thoughts and solemnly tell Lorraine a few words, and then they would never be able to get close to him in this lifetime. The Immortal Bird Corps had left, but Han Jin still did not mean to go back to the Holy Crown City. However, the messengers from the Holy Crown City came very diligently. Obviously, Han Jin was not waiting for nothing. He had already started to arrange, and the great victory in the front line had also been reported to the Holy Crown City through the messengers. But he could not stay in Bite City all the time. One day, he finally summoned the commanders of all the corps and announced that he would go back to the Holy Crown City. After he made his decision, he first turned his eyes to Sunir. If Sunir would also go to the Holy Crown City with him, then he and Sunir would have a bright future. But if Sunir did not want to go with him, it would take a long time and a lot of energy to resolve the knot in Sunir's heart. Sunir hesitated for a moment. It could be seen that she had not made up her mind yet. I talked with Galbin. He will go to the Holy Crown City with us. Han Jin said in a low voice. Ah, Galbin was stunned. The look in his eyes was very obvious. When did you talk with me? Brother, what are you going to do in the Holy Crown City? Sunir asked confusedly. The elves were also going back, and they needed time to heal the wounds left by the war. How could Galbin leave the wild Willow City? I'll go. Galbin wanted to say that he was just going around, but this reason would never convince Sunir. He wanted to find a suitable excuse, but he did not know what to say. There are many details to be taken into consideration when releasing the prisoners of war. I need Galbin's help, Han Jin said slowly. Hun? Galbin stroked his chin. If it were another situation, he would definitely ask Han Jin what he meant. Was he going to make things difficult for him by releasing the prisoners of war if he did not go to the Holy Crown City? But in front of Sunir, he had to show that he was friendly to Han Jin, so as not to cause any misunderstanding to Sunir. Yes, the details need to be taken into consideration. Although he had made his attitude clear, Galbin was still complaining in his heart. You are the Lord. You just need to say a word to release the prisoners. Why do you care about the details? This war has left a scar on all of us. Han Jin understood Galbin's meaning and explained, when we just received those elves, because of many reasons, the prisoners of war were often abused. They needed to be comforted. Sunir hesitated for a moment and finally nodded. Well, I'll go and see. Chapter 432. Because there were still many wounded soldiers, the speed of the army's advance was very slow. It took them 6 days to finally see the city walls of the Holy Crown City. The people in the city also noticed the black mass of troops. When the god of war approached the city walls, the city gates opened and a group of people walked out from inside. This was an army that had returned after a great victory. Of course, someone had to come out to welcome them. However, the number of people was a little small, less than 100. Other than Jedis, Ami J, and a few cardinals, there was also a group of strangers. Guevara looked down from above and saw everything clearly. His eyes suddenly lit up. Before Harley could land the god of war, he had already jumped down from the ship and landed on the ground. Then he laughed loudly. Hallman, what a miracle! You are finally willing to leave your kennel? I haven't seen you for so long, and you are still so rude. I didn't want to mention it, but you forced me. The old man opposite him seemed to be very dissatisfied with Guevara's rudeness. His tone was also very tough. You owe me, and you should pay it back. You got the wrong person. I don't owe you anything. Guevara turned around and shouted. Raphael, come down quickly. Your creditor is here to collect your debt. Creditor? Han Jin was confused. He cast a shrinking spell and appeared beside Guevara, looking at him. Are you Lord Raphael? I have heard so much about you. The old man bowed. Raphael, let me introduce you. Guevara smiled. This is Hallman, the president of the Chamber of Commerce in isolated Cliff City. Hallman, you can talk to him directly about your debt. President Hallman, I have heard so much about you. Han Jin suddenly realized. When did you arrive at the Holy Crown City? Why didn't anyone inform us? Back then, Han Jin only had a small reputation, and he only had Riptide, which had never really been used on the battlefield. Because Langning needed a large number of magic crystal cannons, but had no military funds, Guevara personally came to isolated Cliff City. In Guevara's words, he was ready to sell his old face and establish a friendship with Hallman in the hopes of getting help. From Guevara's attitude, it was clear that he had no confidence. He was no longer the all-powerful Guevara of the past. If Hallman could help him, of course he would be grateful, but if Hallman didn't help him, it was reasonable and normal. As a result, Hallman warmly received Guevara and granted him all of his requests. After Han Jin and Guevara left isolated Cliff City, Hallman was still actively sending supplies to the Holy Crown City, even when the elves were at their most strict. Therefore, Han Jin's attitude was very polite. One had to know that the significance of providing help in a time of need was far greater than adding flowers to a brocade. When we arrived, you had already led the army to battle, Hallman replied with a smile. Han Jin's attitude was far beyond his expectations. He had thought that Han Jin, who had achieved great things at such a young age and had returned with a great victory, would be arrogant and domineering. However, seeing him in person was better than hearing about him. Han Jin's smile was gentle and bright. just like a big boy full of sunshine. Compared to the fierce reputation he had in the legends, it was a huge contrast. Of course, with Holman's experience, he would not underestimate Han Jin just because of an external impression. Han Jin's battle achievements were real. Holman paused and said, "Besides, we are just taking a stroll. How could we delay your military affairs? Just taking a walk?" Guevara chuckled. "You never go out. I've been looking for you many times, but I've never seen you stand up from that broken chair of yours. Did you really come all this way just to take a walk?" "Master Guevara, I don't think I have done anything wrong to you." Holman smiled bitterly. His round face was almost scrunched up. "Why are you always targeting me? I'm doing this for your own good." Although Guevara was still smiling, his eyes were not smiling. Raphael is not a person who likes to pretend. If you really have something, it is best to talk about it openly. In fact, Guevara was indeed thinking for Holman. Holman had helped Han Jin a lot in the past, and had already taken the first step in the right direction. But if there was a first step, there would be a second step. According to Holman's style and character, he was very worried that Holman would do something wrong or say something wrong. Holman's expression was slightly stunned. After a moment, he nodded. "Don't worry, I understand. Mr. Guevara is right. I hate beating around the bush. You are tired, and so am I. Let's just talk about it. We are all friends." Han Jin smiled. "Of course, this is not the place to talk. Let's go upstairs and talk." He was not clear about the relationship between Guevara and Holman. There were some things that could not be said casually. Then, Han Jin's gaze fell on Jed's. "Jed's, these days, how have you been?" Jed's had been staring at Han Jin. He stared at Han Jin without blinking. After a long time, he let out a long sigh. "What? Hard to explain?" "Ha!" Han Jin laughed. "Let's go upstairs and talk. After all, I have time. I can be your best listener." Raphael. Following this voice, an old man in his 50s stepped out from the crowd. "Dwight Steele, you are here too?" Han Jin immediately recognized him. "Yes." Dwight Steele's gaze swept over the crowd as if he was looking for someone. "I'm not the only one here. My brothers are here as well." "Your Dragon Singer mercenary group?" "There are also many high-grade mercenaries. They are all willing to serve you, sir," Dwight Steele said in a sonorous voice. Han Jin took a deep breath. He was pleasantly surprised. His army had suffered a great loss in the battle with the orcs. For the past few days, he had been discussing with Guevara how to deal with the situation. Who would have thought that someone would give him a pillow just as he was about to doze off? Moreover, the high-grade mercenaries were all very powerful. With a bit of training, they would become elite soldiers. "How many?" Gibran asked. "A lot," Dwight Steele said with a smile. They heard that Winston and Saxon were both promoted to Legion commanders. "Our brothers aren't convinced." "Our brothers are not convinced?" Gibran laughed. "I think you are the one who is not convinced." Dwight Steele's expression stiffened, and his elegant smile turned into a dry one. Of all the mercenaries who were not convinced, Dwight Steele was one of them. He was stronger than Winston and Gibran, but he had been forced to stay in isolated Cliff City all this time. Every time he thought about this, he felt wronged because it was Han Jin who had asked him to stay in isolated Cliff City. He said that if a large number of mercenaries left, the city would be too empty, and if there were any accidents, the consequences would be unimaginable. If he had been able to follow Han Jin, he would definitely have been one of the 2 Legion commanders. The leader of a mercenary group was also called a Legion commander, but compared to a Legion commander of a regular army, the difference was too big. The former could only live in the memories of the mercenaries, and as the memories faded, people would slowly forget him. If he could serve under Han Jin, he believed that there would definitely be a place for him in the history books. After living for so long, he had enjoyed all that he could, and had accepted all that he could. His last wish was to leave something behind. Dwight Steele, "Sir, take our brothers and find a place to rest first. I need to take care of a few things first, then I will find you immediately." Han Jin thought for a moment. "How about this? You guys go directly to the Night of Bliss and find Hallister. Just tell him." Before he could finish, he saw Jed's expression change, and only then did he realize that Hallister was still being held captive by the Holy See. "Gibran, take Dwight Steele to the Night of Bliss. and tell our brothers to do whatever they want. It's my treat today. Okay. Gibran grinned. Does that include me? Julia, did you hear that? Han Jin asked in a seemingly careless tone. I heard you, Julia replied, word by word. Julia, I was just joking. Gibran immediately lost his temper. Although he always looked cold and gloomy in front of outsiders, he was not angry at all in front of Julia. It's not my first time in the Holy Crown City. Do you think I've been in that kind of place before? You used to hide in the basement with Julia. You couldn't go even if you wanted to. Sasu continued. Yeah. Morrison's University said casually, if you could still run out and fool around in that kind of place, then I would really admire you. In the whole continent, I don't think anyone could do it except for Raphael. What did you say? Han Jin felt that this was not the right thing to say. Morrison's also realized his own weakness and hurriedly explained. I meant that he couldn't come out. Only you can come and go as you please. I thought you meant that only Raphael could go out and fool around whenever he wanted. Leger smirked. On the other side, Holman's eyes were a little dazed. He had seen many lords who did not put on airs, but he had never seen one like this. Han Jin did not put on airs at all, so there was nothing wrong with him. Moreover, the other young people all looked indifferent. They must have often joked with Han Jin. Ever since Han Jin made a name for himself in isolated Cliff City, Holman had also started to pay attention to Han Jin. However, he did not get much information. Han Jin rarely came out. If he watched too closely and was discovered, it would cause unhappiness. The people he sent out could only watch and listen from afar. Plus, his people would only send back important information. Boring conversations like daily gossip would be filtered out. Otherwise, they would just be asking for a scolding. Some things had to be seen with one's own eyes in order to get a feel for it. Listening to other people's words would often distort the truth. Let's go. We'll talk on the boat. Han Jin was too lazy to talk to Morrison's and Leger. Holman and Han Jin tried to be polite to each other. Seeing a flash of impatience in Han Jin's eyes, Holman suddenly remembered Gavar's words. Without further ado, he cast a levitation spell and was the first to fly up. Morrison's grabbed the ladder and was about to climb up when Han Jin grabbed his shoulder. Don't go up. What? Morrison's widened his eyes in confusion. In his impression, Han Jin was not a person who liked to hold grudges. What are you doing up there? Go and see Sylvia. Han Jin's eyes showed a hint of a smile. Recalling the red-haired woman who called herself Old Mother every time, he wanted to laugh. Then he thought of Morrison's helplessness in the hands of the devil, and he wanted to laugh even more. Morrison's body stiffened, but his hands were still tightly holding the ladder. What's wrong with you? Han Jin was a little surprised. When they came back, Morrison's kept talking about how Sylvia was and how she had been wronged. Now that they were finally back in the Holy Crown City, why did he suddenly become so negative? Moxink looked around and pulled Han Jin aside. The others were all busy boarding the ship and didn't notice them. Even if they did, they wouldn't come over to eavesdrop unless it was someone else. Moxink was more likely to eavesdrop on them. Han Jin turned around while following Morrison's and said, Leger, don't go up yet. What's wrong? Leger asked confusedly. Go and see Chi Li for me. Han Jin said, oh, and little Joseph. Got it. Leger jumped up from the ladder and walked towards the city gate with Sasu. Dwight Steele saw Leger and Sasu follow and waited for a while. The group of people laughed and chatted as they disappeared through the city gate. Raphael, if I tell you, will you laugh at me? Morrison's looked at Han Jin with a serious face. Then don't tell me. Han Jin turned around and was about to leave. Wait, Morrison's grabbed Han Jin and said, if you don't help me, then I'm really done for. Is it that serious? Han Jin found it funny. Raphael, I'm so annoyed that I'm about to die. How is it not serious? Morrison's frowned and said, when I can't see Sylvia, I really miss her. Sometimes I even dream of her. But now that I can see her, I suddenly don't want to see her. Why? Han Jin asked in surprise. Because, Morrison scratched his stubble hard. Because I hate her. What do you hate about her? Han Jin asked seriously. If Sylvia heard this, she would definitely die. I hate her temper, Morrison shouted. She's too irritable. If I do something that makes her unhappy, she always yells at me. Why do you think she's like this? If only her temper was like Yelena's. Even if she can't, Sunir will be fine. I don't use other people's examples. Do you understand? Han Jin said angrily. That's what I meant. I didn't mean it. Han Jin looked at Morrison's for a moment and said slowly, I understand. Deep down, you still like Sylvia. After all, you two grew up together and have feelings for each other. But you can't accept Sylvia's temper. It's very painful. What you really want is someone like Dominique. Why are you staring? I'm saying that you want someone who's shy and can accept Sylvia. You're not satisfied and think that you can find someone better. You can't bear to abandon Sylvia and you don't want to hurt her. Is that right? Moxink stared blankly for a moment and cried, Yes, that's right. Raphael, tell me, what should I do? Haha, I haven't even solved my own problem, and you're asking me what should I do? Han Jin smiled helplessly. So take care. After that, Han Jin patted Morrison's on the shoulder and turned to leave. Hey, Raphael, Morrison shouted. No matter if you want to give up or accept, Sylvia is seriously injured now. You should go and visit her. That's what you should do, right? Han Jin turned around and said, Do I need to say more? Morrison's slowly lowered his head. Han Jin's words made sense, and he couldn't refute them. On the deck of the God of War, Guevara was making introductions to Gao Bin. The first person he introduced was Gao Bin. Seeing the highest leader of the elves smiling and drinking wine, Gao Bin's expression didn't change. As the saying goes, the business world is like a battlefield. In the first business, you have to fight with others until you bleed. Later on, you have to work together sincerely. Guevara had seen many examples like this. In his opinion, there was nothing to be surprised about. Instead, it was Han Jin, who didn't put on airs at all, that made him feel strange. Next was Yelena and Sunir. Of course, Guevara couldn't tell them about the conflict between them, so he only briefly introduced them. Next was Stilberg, Hogan, and Harley. With Stilberg's strength, there was no room for him to speak here, so there was no need for a formal introduction. However, he was Han Jin's little playmate. In name, they were master and servant, but in reality, they were family. This identity was enough. As the saying went, there were 7 ranks in front of the Prime Minister's door. No one dared to offend Stilberg. After everyone was seated, Han Jin appeared at the side of the ship. Guevara asked, Morrison's is being mysterious. Why did he look for you? Huh? Han Jin shrugged. Where is he? Guevara saw that Han Jin didn't want to talk about it, so he changed the topic. He went to find Sylvia, Han Jin said as he sat beside Jeds. I say, can you smile? Look at your sad face. Jeds, what's wrong? Sunir asked with concern, but Yelena looked away. She had a guilty conscience and didn't dare to talk to Jeds. She was worried that he would see through her. Can I have a little of your time? Jeds slowly stood up. I told you, I have plenty of time today. Han Jin smiled. Can't you say it here? Hallman was trying to find the right words, but when he saw that Han Jin cared more about Jeds, he tactfully looked away and whispered to Guevara. It's best not to say it here. Jeds slowly walked up the stairs. What about you? Amy J, aren't you going? I'll wait here, Amy J said with a smile. Amij laughed. When Jediz's figure had disappeared below the deck, he added in a low voice, Sir, these days, His Holiness has been in a bad mood. If he has offended you, please forgive him. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Han Jin paused. Amy J, tell me, how is Hallister now? He's not very good, but he's not very bad either. When it first happened, the Pope didn't know, so he couldn't stop it. Since then, he's been trying his best to protect Hallister, Amy J said. It's been hard on him. Han Jin smiled and slowly walked up the stairs. Chapter 433. These days, there are too many abnormalities in the Holy Crown City. In Han Jin's room, Jeds talked to himself. His eyes wandered around, as if deliberately avoiding eye contact with Han Jin. Abnormalities? What happened? Han Jin sat at the table and gestured with his hand. Sit down and talk. Many priests and believers have become very extreme, Jed said slowly. They are colluding with each other, forming gangs, and they're all targeting you. Targeting me? Yes. They say that you're trying to limit the development of the Holy See. You are vicious and a complete blasphemer. Jed's paused. Some say that when the dragon field attacked the Holy Crown City, you knew in advance, so you emptied the defense of the Holy Crown City. The Holy See should not continue to cooperate with you. Otherwise, the Holy See will be destroyed by you sooner or later. Some say that if a militaristic person like you rules the Holy Crown City, sooner or later it will bring disaster to the city. The people should unite and drive you out. So serious? Han Jin said with a faint smile. When did I become a street rat? I used to think that it was Adolf or Aud who was bewitching the believers, but after careful investigation, I found that it had nothing to do with them. Then I thought that it must be some people with bad intentions deliberately stirring up trouble. Their purpose is to make the conflict between you and the Holy See bigger and bigger and indirectly weaken our strength. Jed's narrowed his eyes slightly. But there is one thing that can't be explained. They are making so much trouble, but your spy master, Chipango, has been indifferent. This is your Holy Crown City. No matter what kind of enemy they are, no matter how strong their background is, here they must abide by the rules you set. Otherwise, you can sweep them into the garbage with just a word. Donald's hell purple flower is powerful enough, right? But I have never heard of them daring to act openly in other lords' territory. So, I can't figure out who they are. Why do they have to be so bold? Han Jin smiled, but didn't say anything. He just listened quietly. However, after I saw you, I understood a lot, Jed said softly. Raphael, did you know? You have a fatal flaw in front of me. Fatal flaw? Han Jin was stunned. Because you know that I won't lie to you, so you don't want to lie to me, at least not maliciously. Jed sighed softly. When I was talking to you, you should have made some appropriate expressions, such as anger, anxiety, or confusion. But your expression, I can't describe it. To be honest, even if I didn't suspect you beforehand, I would have started to suspect you when I saw your eyes. You've been avoiding my gaze. What did you see my gaze? Han Jin laughed. Some things don't need to be seen. I can feel it. Jed slowly turned around and looked at Han Jin. Why? You mean, why would you do that? Why are you deliberately stirring up trouble? Jed said word by word. Could it be that you're creating a reason to attack the Vatican? You think so? Han Jin raised his eyebrows. The facts force me to think so, Jed said slowly. Emoji warned me just now that you've been very angry these days. So it's true. Han Jin pondered for a moment, then laughed. Jeds, have you ever thought about why I don't want to lie to you? Because I've never... You won't lie to me, so I won't lie to you? Don't you think this kind of causality is too ridiculous? Jed showed a stunned expression. He had always thought that this was normal, but when Han Jin specifically discussed causality, he finally understood. If this kind of causality was really solid and no one could surpass it, then the world would become a beautiful paradise. No one would lie to others because others didn't lie to them. No one would hurt others because others didn't hurt them. Then, what disputes and conflicts would there be? Let me tell you, Han Jin spoke very slowly. I don't want to lie to you because I've never thought of you as an enemy. Not in the past, not now, and not in the future. Of course, if you can always think of me as a friend, you should know that I don't like to be taken advantage of. Jed smiled bitterly. In fact, he had always thought of Han Jin as a friend, so he took Han Jin's trust and attitude for granted. It was like a person in trouble, and his friends helped him. It was normal in that person's eyes, and if it were him, he would also help his friends. I've already signed an alliance with the elves. Han Jin leaned back in his chair and said lazily. Do you know why I did that? Although the orcs' power has been weakened, their power is still... I've already destroyed the orcs, Han Jin said with a smile. The abyss is ready to make a move, and we're facing the threat of Che-Sam. It's good to have one more helper. Bullsh *T, Han Jin cursed. Jed's expression froze. He didn't know how to respond to such rudeness. Moreover, Han Jin didn't elaborate. Who was Bulsh *T? Was Han Jin talking about him, Jed's? Or was he talking about the Abyss and Chasam? The most fundamental reason is them. After saying that, Han Jin raised 2 fingers. Them, Sunir and Julia. To me, all the reasons you said and thought of in your head are not as important as them. Han Jin smiled. Perhaps in the eyes of others, my reasons are absurd, but, Jed's, you have to remember, I'm not a general, and I'm not a politician. What I want is for them to always. Before he could finish, Han Jin's voice stopped abruptly. What do you want to pursue? Although Jed's knew that his words might backfire, he was really curious and couldn't help but ask. Let's talk about it later. Han Jin smiled. Jed's actually suspected that he was preparing to kill the Vatican, which hurt him a lot, so he became a little emotional. What they think is insignificant, I take it as a treasure. What they think is important, they think is important, but it doesn't mean much to me. Whether you understand or not, I still want to say this. Sunir and Julia are more important than the entire elven race in my eyes. So, Jed's, you think too much. As long as you're still the Pope, I won't point my finger at the Vatican. Jedis was silent for a moment. Then a bitter smile appeared on his face. He had always believed in Han Jin, otherwise he wouldn't have been so angry. After a moment, Jedis sighed. Now I understand the thoughts of those priests. You are indeed likely to bring disaster to the Holy Crown City, because you are too emotional and extreme. Are the 2 of them really more important than the entire elven race? I don't think I'm the one who's emotional, Han Jin said lightly. And so far, I've been very successful, haven't I? Well, let's not talk about this. Jed said. Raphael, tell me, why did you deliberately provoke the conflict between you and the Vatican? Do you still remember the first time we met? Of course I do. Jed said. When he was attacked by Han Jin, it was his own magic that saved him, and it had nothing to do with Han Jin. However, after he woke up, he had no magic. If it wasn't for Han Jin, he probably wouldn't have been able to walk out of the forest, and would have been eaten by the magic beast long ago. You knew that Nicholas would definitely kill the Vatican, so you wanted to find a peaceful place to continue spreading the doctrine. At least you couldn't let the fire of God extinguish, and I needed your help. Han Jin smiled. So, we could be together now, because we have a common language. What does this have to do with you now? Do I have a common language with Adolf? Jed's was stunned, hesitated for a moment, and shook his head. He already has a deep prejudice against you. In fact, I have been paying attention to the Vatican's movements. Han Jin said slowly. What Adolf wants, one is to completely open the parish, and the other is to implement the order of God's grace that he has modified. All believers will have their rent reduced by half. Haha, compared to your former Pope Tuya, he is very conservative. He only wants half. How do you know? Jed's asked in surprise. You have been arguing for so many days. How can I not know? Han Jin said. Completely open the parish and implement his plan. If I agree with him, the whole Holy Crown City, including the branch cities except for the nobles, everyone will become a believer. What about me? What about my tens of thousands of soldiers? What should we do to survive? This time, it was Jed's turn to be silent. I really wonder why there are always such brainless people in the Vatican. Han Jin said coldly. Other than ideals, do they know that there is something called reality? A person is eating in his own home, and he suddenly barges in and asks for half of the food. If that person dares to refuse, then he is a blasphemer and should be expelled or even destroyed. Is he a robber or a believer? Jed's, if it were you, would you give it to him? Yes. You. Han Jin was stunned. For the glory of God, I can sacrifice my life at any time, Jed's said softly. What he meant was, I don't even care about my life, so why would I care about food? Sigh. I realize that it is very unwise to discuss issues with a stubborn believer. Han Jin's tone was a little helpless. But you will never agree. I can understand that. Jed smiled. Well, let's get down to business. Driven by profit, is he really recruiting believers? Han Jin said. If I issue an order that all those who are not willing to join the Vatican will be exempted from all taxes, you won't be able to recruit a single person. Do you believe me? This is not necessarily true. Don't think of God as too great, and don't think of human nature as too simple. Han Jin said lightly. What angers me the most is, who gave him the right to come here and jump around and point out that I am wrong? You always shout about the freedom of belief, so the people have the right to become believers and also the right to refuse. But what do? Those who believe in the doctrine are bright and good, while those who are unwilling to join the Vatican are dark and evil. Isn't your freedom too one-sided? If you believe, you'll be free. If you don't, you will be your enemy. Can I understand it this way? Those who are willing to work for you are good and can go to heaven after death. Those who are unwilling to work for you are bad and must be reformed or even destroyed. Jed smiled bitterly. Although these words were uncomfortable to hear, the corresponding phenomenon did exist. Belief is actually similar to morality. Han Jin said, for example, if you are willing to be a saint, then you can be strict with yourself in all aspects. If others are willing to be a prodigal son, then it is their choice. As long as they do not hurt others, no one has the right to interfere. If you must punish them just because you are uncomfortable or don't like them, then this morality is a kind of hypocrisy. You're not talking about me, are you? Jed said resentfully. I'm talking about Adolf. Han Jin said, I know very well what he has done and said, and I have also thought about how to change to win his approval. First, I have to give up my power, Although I don't know what kind of power I have to give it all away. I also have to obey the Vatican's command, and even become their dog. If anyone dares to be dissatisfied with the Vatican, I will be the first to stand up and bark. Or I might as well join the Vatican, crawl under the statue, and kiss the toes of the statue. If I can do this, then Adolf will think that I am a great good person. Jeds, is there any room for discussion with Adolf like this? He won't talk to me at all, and will only see if I am willing to contribute. Then, who made this rule? Only by giving wholeheartedly and without regrets can one become a good person. Was it made by bad people? Because that's the only way they can reap more benefits. Adolf is not what you think, Jed said with a bitter smile. I also admit that his attitude is a bit extreme, but he also knows that there are many things that can't be done. He is just saying it. Is that so? Han Jin smiled. He really wanted to say that the only reason he could recognize the Vatican's position was because of you, Jeds. If Adolf wanted to change the Pope or establish a new Pope, then he, Han Jin, will be the first to disagree. However, there was a hint of provocation in his words, so in the end, he swallowed his words. No matter what, he saved Chi Li and Sylvia, Jed said. Didn't you just say that there are some things that you cherish the most? Yes, I am very grateful to him, so I have to give in? Do I have to listen to whatever he says? No, how should I put it? I hope you can understand his feelings, Jed said slowly. Jeds slowly said, when Adolf left the unsetting sun mountains, the Vatican was still very prosperous and powerful. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, everything would change? The powerful College of Cardinals now only has a dozen or so cardinals left, and the Knights of Light are only a few hundred people left. The Vatican is now on the verge of destruction. If you have talked to him face to face, you can feel his pain and urgency. Raphael, you will forgive him. Forgive? It's too early to talk about that. Han Jin said softly. He is anxious with me here? Ridiculous. The Holy Crown City is mine. His duty is not to find ways to snatch territory from me, but to go to the southwest region and settle accounts with Nicholas. He will go, Jed said. Adolf has said many times that as long as the Vatican is on the right track, he will leave. 10 years. Or 20 years. Han Jin sneered. Jeds, to be honest, I don't want to have a conflict with the Vatican, so I didn't rush to enter the city after I came back. If I saw Adolf, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to control myself. But what you did, aren't you encouraging Adolf? Jed said. Almost half of the believers and priests have been incited. If they really do something, what will you do? if Adolf uses the emotions of the believers and priests to continue to force you, what will you do? The bigger they make, the better. Hanjin said softly. What? Jed's asked in surprise. Now Adolf and I are on opposite sides. He wants to take, and I don't want to give, so the contradiction between us is irreconcilable. Hanjin smiled. I think you don't want to see a conflict between the Holy Crown City and the Vatican. Adonis, Ami J, and Aud also don't want to see it. By the way, Aud's wife is on the God of War, but she hasn't been feeling well these days, so she didn't come out. When you go back, tell Aud. Adolf, he has been traveling around the continent for a long time. With his experience, I don't believe he can't see how critical the situation is. If the Holy Crown City and the Vatican really have a conflict, the current Vatican is definitely not the opponent of the Holy Crown City. The power of the Vatican is almost gone, which makes him feel pain and urgency. Does he really have the courage to support the riots at the risk of being completely destroyed? This responsibility is too heavy for him to bear. You mean, when the fire gets bigger and bigger, Adolf will be afraid, and he will choose to put out the fire. Hanjin smiled. And I will also try to put out the fire, so at least we have a common language. Adolf will also lose his strength, so it will be much easier to talk. The fire will get bigger and bigger. It's already very chaotic now. What more do you want? Jed said. Not enough. It's far from enough. At this moment, Sasua's anxious voice suddenly came from outside. Raphael, Miss Chi wants to see you for something urgent. Can you go there immediately? What's the matter? Hanjin was a little surprised. Why didn't she tell me before asking you to go? That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.